Welcome back, everyone. This is your host, the DN WhatIf, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku was stripped of his hero license and imprisoned in Tartarus? A special shout out to the original creator, DancingInTheStorm. Please make sure to show your support by checking out their work from the description. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku had been taken so suddenly, too suddenly, far too rapidly for Toshinori to do more than whisper a few preliminary words of comfort and strength. Once the genetic tests had revealed that All for One was Izuku's father, the soldiers had rushed in within the hour. Tartarus soldiers, dressed in sterile, dead wile, and seized his young, shattered successor, Izuku limp with shock and fear and what Toshinori dreaded to assume was dull resignation. Things moved slowly after that. There was nothing to be done. Izuku was in Tartarus, and even the former symbol of peace could not gain access, not when the boy had such an insidiously close connection with Toshinori, his boy, no matter the blood claim All for One possessed. Not that he didn't try. Hour after hour after hour, he tried, fighting a losing battle with Tartarus security that bowed to no man nor force that was not the Japanese government. He agreed with All for One, in one point and one point only, the government was illogically corrupt, to seize the boy that was 10 times the man Toshinori would ever be. While he was busy arguing with blank-faced receptionists, Nedzu was fighting an uphill battle of his own, intimidating the national press into keeping the details of Izuku's genetics test and subsequent arrest out of the public eye. The principal pulled strings Toshinori didn't know existed, somehow limiting the scope of the matter to high-ranking government officials, significant heroes, and, of course, the Tartarus staff. One other person knew of Izuku's arrest. One other person who was wholly displeased with his son's incarceration. Displeasure, Toshinori thought, swallowing bile, was too mild a word. It implied at best irritation, at worst a towering rage. Displeasure completely failed to convey the bodies smeared to pulpy streaks, the comprehensive decimation of Tartarus security failsafes, the camera footage simmering in bloody static. Displeasure failed to convey the way the cameras trained on Izuku's cell cut off as if strangled, leaving Izuku and All for One's subsequent disappearance to dark imagination. One day. It had taken one day for Izuku's world to completely shatter itself, one day to fall from laughing with Uraraka and Todoroki to living with the resident definition of terror. One day for the world to reinvent itself in horrific, sweeping detail. Toshinori's eyes haunted him in the mirror. Behind him, Izuku stared out of his picture frame, determination and unexpected joy radiating from him as strongly as the death trance radiated from his father. Toshinori's choked as the weight of the matter settled in his stomach, and he heaved great, messy gasps that emptied the contents of his stomach onto the waiting floor. Blood mixed with the bile, turning the tiles as chunky and red as the corpses All for One left in his wake. Footsteps in the hallway. Toshinori wiped his mouth and ignored the tiles. Aizawa stepped in, eyes as fiercely shadowed as when young Bakugo had been kidnapped by the League. This wasn't so different, Toshinori thought, but there was no rescuing Izuku from All for One, not when Toshinori's strength was gone, not when society would ship a rescued Izuku right back to the highest levels of Tartarus. Aizawa was not so much slumped as coiled. Cloth snapped tight around Toshinori's waist, wrists, shoulders, and Aizawa mercilessly reeled him in. "You should have told me," Aizawa hissed, deathly calm. Toshinori crumpled against the bonds. "Told you what? Told you that I knew his father, told you that he was the villain who gave me my injury? That was private information, and not relevant at the time." "You should have told me," Aizawa said, hair floating around him like a haze of death, "that you groomed the child up to face that man in mortal combat as soon as his quirk came under control." Toshinori choked on blood, swallowed hard, jerked back against unyielding cloth. "What did you hear?" he asked, hoarse and grief-stricken. "I heard him muttering," Aizawa said, cold as steel. "I heard him say that you trained him to face the man one day, that he could hardly bear to look you in the eyes, that he didn't deserve your power or love. I heard him say that his quirk wasn't ready to face that man, as if anyone should ever be ready for that. You were never interested in him as a student. You wanted a successor to carry on your revenge. The words punched through Toshinori's chest and straight on out the other side. He staggered, held aloft only by the cutting edges of Aizawa's scarf. That's not? You misunderstand, Aizawa. Then tell me, Aizawa hissed, dragging Toshinori to a seat. Tell me in full. You groomed Midoriya to face his father in battle, and now the fool child is going to attempt to defy his father to the death. You could not have hurt him worse than you did. Toshinori stumbled into his chair, stomach threatening to overthrow itself again. You understand this is to remain in the strictest confidence, he said. I will be the judge of that, Aizawa said evenly. So Toshinori did. He outlined the history of All for One, of One for All, of his incomplete first defeat of All for One. He told, voice breaking, of the long hunt for a worthy successor, of the desperate, quirkless child that threw himself into mortal danger for the sake of another without pause, of Izuku's endless compassion and determination, of Izuku's mission to become the next symbol of peace, All for One notwithstanding. I thought he would never have to face All for One, he murmured, sagging against his restraints. I thought I had ended that, so Izuku would never have to know fear like I did. I swear to you, Aizawa, I never thought he would come near that monster after I threw him in Tartarus. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. You still groomed a child to take up a mantle too heavy for him to bear. I offered, Toshinori corrected, incredibly weary. I offered the mantle, and he accepted, and I have done everything in my power to help him, no matter how inadequate the aid. Please believe me, Aizawa. I never thought it would come to this. His father likely does not care, Aizawa breathed, locking eyes with Toshinori. I wonder which will be stronger, his hatred of you for stealing his son, or his hatred of One for All itself. A black hole opened in Toshinori's soul, draining away the threatening bile and leaving a hollow, aching pit in its place. Silence reigned. Outside, a door slammed, breaking the unnatural quiet that descended on the 1A dorms ever since Izuku's arrest. Toshinori looked up, blinking back tears, and wondered, with a sick sort of dread, at Izuku's fate. Shoto was dead certain no one else in the class had considered Midoriya Inko. Everyone was too new at this, too new at world-ending trauma, to consider the bigger fallout. Shoto was on sickeningly familiar ground here. He knew the dangers and heartbreak of leaving a traumatized mother alone, without support. He knew the dangers of mental collapse. He was far closer to it himself than he wanted to admit. Midoriya had always cried freely, and for all he wanted to be like his friend, tears were not something that came easy to Shoto. Still, he tried because with the emotions ripping at his chest, it was either tears or trying to overthrow the government, and he knew which one would be more successful. He tried for a good 20 minutes before the tears started, and when they started, they just didn't stop. Someone knocked at his door. He ignored them. They retreated. More tears, slow and awkward, and a voice in the back of his head thinking it was an irrational amount of tears, considering how little he had cried over his mother, over his training, over his life at large. Maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe tears helped. Uraraka has certainly thought so, screaming against a pillow in the stairwell, and he had to admit she seemed calmer afterwards. Calm was something he needed right now. After the tears finished, more from dehydration than a lessening of pain, he lay on his bed, exhausted, and thought again of Midoriya Inko. What was her situation? Was the government after her, too, for marrying the man who raised Kamino Ward? Probably. He rolled off his bed on that thought, landing lightly on his feet. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Checking the mirror for tear stains, he deemed himself clear and padded out the door. Aizawa wasn't in the classroom. When he knocked at the door to the teacher's lounge, he was met not by Aizawa but All Might, eyes still red-rimmed and haunted, who told him that no one had seen Aizawa all day. Perhaps he should have started with Nedzu to begin with. Yaoyorozu tried to stop him in the hallway. Todoroki, she said. We're having a meeting in the common room of the dorms inn. It was then that Todoroki became aware of a building anger at everything. He bit his tongue to keep it from lashing out at Yaoyorozu, instead coldly brushing past her. Midoriya would have scolded him for being rude. Midoriya wasn't here. He walked, uninvited, through the doors to the principal's office. Nedzu glanced up from multiple screens of information, tail stiffening for a moment before relaxing. "Ah, Todoroki," he said. "How may I assist you?" "What is happening to Midoriya Inko?" he asked with absolutely no preamble. Nedzu folded his paws on the desk. "I am afraid I am not at liberty to. The government kidnapped her son because of the family relation." "What is happening to her?" Nedzu hummed. "You are the first of the students to be asking these questions. What made you consider Midoriya Inko?" An open invitation to elaborate. A probe. But he couldn't say, not without exposing his family history, which would be the end of peace for his mother. He could imagine it now, Nedzu aiming pointed questions like this at his mother, who was still so fragile and guilty. He couldn't say. "It's what Midoriya would want," he said instead. Nedzu nodded, once. "Please, sit," Nedzu said, gesturing. Midoriya Inko was traveling in America when her son was arrested. She will be staying there for refuge at the moment. America has anti-discrimination laws against arresting family members of villains for relationship alone. She is safe, Todoroki. For once, good news. Shoto breathed a little easier and stayed standing. "I want her contact information," he said. "She needs someone to talk to. I'm not going to let her break like..." "Too much." He had said too much. "Like your mother?" Nedzu asked. Shoto stumbled backward, mouth locked shut. He wasn't giving away more. "I know an abuse case when I see one," Nedzu said, something soft in his eyes. "I wish you would talk to me, Todoroki. I cannot move forward without sufficient evidence, and your testimony would provide me that evidence." He remained silent. "Think about it," Nedzu said, picking up a pen and scribbling down something. He passed the note to Shoto. It was a phone number. "You know enough of my history to know I despise humans that make light of others' suffering." He was in over his head. He had come in expecting a danger to Midoriya Inko, not a confrontation over endeavor. "I need Midoriya Inko's contact information," he repeated, jerky and stiff, slipping the note into his pocket to think about later. Nedzu nodded, slow and grave. "And what would you do with it?" "My mother," he said, tasting the words, "went mad because no one helped her. It was uncomfortable to speak of it openly. I'm not letting that happen to Midoriya's mother, too." Nedzu considered him grimly for a moment, his look saying full well that he knew better than to treat Shoto as the child he never had the chance to be. Nedzu's eyes broke off from Shoto with an almost audible snap. "Very well," he said, diving under his desk and emerging with a thick binder. He flipped open to a page titled Midoriya Izuku and scanned down the page. Shoto hurried over to look. For some reason, Nedzu let him. Shoto's back stiffened at the half-empty page. Midoriya Inko's contact information was there, alongside an emergency contact Shoto didn't recognize, and that was it. No father contact information, no mention of a father at all. It was painfully apparent how little contact the man at Kamino had with his family. He dragged his phone out of his pocket and began copying down Midoriya Inko's cell phone number. Nedzu shook his head. "Her calls are being restricted by the American government to monitor her and safeguard her from the Japanese government. Use her private email if you want an unguarded conversation." Shoto was awkward with his hands when it came to writing instead of shaping fire and ice. But privacy, he knew, was to be protected at all costs in such a sensitive situation. He copied down the email and turned to leave. He stopped at the door as the implications of Nedzu's cooperation registered. The principal might be willing to give him news, any news, on Midoriya Izuku. "Is Midoriya," he started, pausing at the dark look that flashed across Nedzu's eyes. "I am legally bound to only disclose information to people with enough clearance," Nedzu recited almost dully. Shoto rolled his back into a loose, ready stance, didn't bother to withhold scathing commentary. "Todoroki Shoto," Nedzu said, quiet and still, "I have no choice in the matter. I have stretched the rules by giving you Midoriya Inko's contact information. I cannot break them by sharing information so classified that most pro-heroes have no idea of its existence." Shoto's words strangled in his throat. Nedzu had bent the rules for him anyways, managed to tell him that Midoriya's case was so classified that the government was overseeing its every detail. Nedzu had managed to tell him that Midoriya was in even greater danger than Shoto had thought. Swallowing back words that were meant for the government, not Nedzu, Shoto nodded once and left. Walking into the dorms, he found the meeting Yayorza mentioned in full swing. Aizawa was there, answering questions, so that's where Aizawa went, but he could tell from listening in the back that Aizawa was giving out no more answers on Midoriya than Nedzu. He did learn. In cold, satisfied sort of way, that class was cancelled for the next few days while they all endured government questioning. It was his opportunity to give the government agents a piece of his mind. After a few more minutes, he decided he needed somewhere quiet to take in everything more than he needed to listen to this. He avoided the elevator because Jairu was getting in it and he couldn't talk to anyone right now. He took the stairs instead. Once he got to his room, he lay on his back, shut his eyes to process the news of Midoriya Inko, and much to his surprise, fell asleep. It was nearly lunchtime when he woke up. Class was cancelled for 1A, but their teachers still insisted they eat with the rest of the school. He would have preferred to sit alone, but Uraraka has insisted that no one eat alone today, and he admitted that the company settled him. He joined the whole of Class 1A, all 19 of them, seated around one of the larger lunch tables. Conversation was subdued, rippling with underlying tension, not helped by the fact that today, half the school seemed to be watching their table. Kaminari attempted small talk. It didn't really work. Even Shoto could tell that the words were stilted at best. And Azui jumped really high, but she didn't come down, and that's how we learned that Azui's feet stuck to the ceiling. Except then Uraraka said, "You're mumbling again, Midoriya?" A switch flipped. Kaminari broke off, eyes wide. Ashido burst into tears. Ojiro's tail lashed, knocking Mineta and Siro off the bench. The rest of the lunch hour passed silently. Aizawa took one look at all of them huddling back to the dorms and shipped them off to the field, where he set them up in pairs and ordered them to spar. Shoto worked his feelings out with big blocks of ice, the way he had always done. It didn't help much. He imagined slamming a wall of ice into the guards who had come to take Midoriya. If only he had been faster. The ice jerked to a stop. Shoto turned to meet Aizawa's glare head-on. "I wasn't aiming to hurt Tokoyami," he said. "You nearly froze Jairu," Aizawa said, voice flat and level. "Keep it under control, Todoroki." Shoto gritted his teeth, turned on his heel, and sent out another, smaller wave of ice. Fire was not an option, not when his temper was this hot. Ice caused frostbite in minutes. Fire burned immediately, and as Aizawa-sensei had just shoved down his throat, his control was shaky at best. He looked up to find that Dark Shadow had dragged Tokoyami out of the ice path just in time. Tokoyami himself had hands strangled around one of Dark Shadow's wings, and it occurred to Shoto that he wasn't the only person struggling with control. It was good, Shoto thought through the ache of anger and Quirk fatigue, to have a friend who took no offense at his fury. He wrote an awkward email to Midoriya Inko in the time after sparring, when Aizawa had worn all the class into an exhausted stupor. Shoto was plenty tired himself, but endeavor had driven endurance into him with a drill bit, and this message might not be able to wait. "Dear Midoriya." Too stereotypical, and it felt condescending. Midoriya. Too formal. He skipped the introduction and typed out a short note introducing himself. He hesitated, briefly, then outlined an extremely limited sketch of his family life. "I understand," he wanted to convey. "We do not know each other, but I will not watch history repeat itself," he typed. He paused. "Your son was my friend," he added, backspaced, edited. "Close friend." He looked over the email a little helplessly and decided it wasn't getting any better. He hit send. The moment he did, he realized he should have added an introduction after all. And then he realized that all Midoriya Inko knew about him was that he had pounded her son in the sports festival until Midoriya permanently disfigured his hand. Why would she want to talk to him? Still, he had to try. He would never forgive himself if he didn't. Morning came again, without Midoriya in it. Today, government agents flooded the 1A dorms, pulling aside students one at a time for interviews. They were going alphabetically, which meant Shoto had a while to wait before his name was called. He watched from the common room couch as his classmates left, pale-faced and determined, following men and women in gray suits. He checked his email. Midoriya Inko had not responded. He spent the time before his interview battling between letting rip his anger over Midoriya's mistreatment and trying to sit on his temper for fear he would say something the government agents chose to take as incriminating. By the time Aizawa called his name, he hung in an uneasy limbo between the two. "You are Todoroki Shoto," his government agent confirmed, a notepad tucked under her arm. He nodded, not trusting his words. "Please follow me." She led him out of the dorm building and through the main classrooms to a hall of sterile, white rooms. From one, he could hear Kirishima saying how manly and sincere Midoriya was. In another room, someone was crying. His agent led him nearly to the end of the hallway before turning into an empty room. It was empty except for 2 chairs and a wilting potted plant. Todoroki pointedly ignored his chair as the government agent took a seat. She looked at him for several seconds before scribbling something in her notebook. From here, he could just make out the words unwilling and obstructive. He sat. "Now," the agent said, removing her hand from the pad of paper, "you were trained extensively by your father before coming to UA, in both quirk use and mental performance under extreme pressure, correct?" Todoroki's world went frigid, then red-hot, then frigid again. They knew, the government knew, about his childhood. And they had done nothing. "You were trained to recognize the physical and mental signs of villainy," the agent pressed. Drowning in lava, he jerked out a nod. He knew what was next. "Did you recognize these signs in Midoriya?" the agent pressed. "Other classmates claim the two of you were relatively close acquaintances. The government had left him to suffer. All these years, he imagined that if he worked his way up as a hero, he could expose his father to the government and gain some level of retribution and closure. That never would happen, because the government had already known. He expected to rage. Instead, the cold chill of shock settled in and he grasped at it, suddenly desperate to keep a neutral face. He wasn't going to give the government a single word they could use against Midoriya, not when they had less than no regard for compassion. "We spoke some after the sports festival," he said, weighing each word from a very great distance away. He never showed any sign of villainy. He showed the opposite. "I couldn't imagine anyone could care about people the way he did until I met him." He stopped there, keeping it short, keeping it concise. He would do something he'd regret if he talked too long. The government agent tried some other questions. Did Midoriya ever act suspiciously? Did he ever go off alone? Did he ever show signs of multiple quirks? The last question startled Shoto nearly enough to throw him out of his furious calm. No, he had never seen Midoriya use more than one quirk. "His fighting status has changed significantly since the sports festival," the agent said, pausing to write something down. "He changed from exploding body parts to a high-speed, low-power technique. Finally, something that would cast doubt from Midoriya." "Explain that to me," he said, tight heat leaking from his voice. He was losing his grasp on his calm. He tried channeling too much power into his fingers during the sports festival, so his fingers broke. His mentor during internships taught him to spread his power all over his body, making him faster and weaker. The agent paused, wrote out a small eternity's worth of notes before snapping the notepad shut. "That should be all. Thank you for your cooperation in this ongoing investigation. Be aware that the government may contact you at any time to request a further statement." Shoto nodded, stood, left. The truth of what had just happened was still sinking into his bones. The government had left him to his fate for years because of who his father was. And now the government was doing the same to Midoriya. Aizawa took one look at him coming through the doors and took him aside. "What happened in the interview, Todoroki?" Almost blurting it out, Shoto bit his tongue until he tasted blood. He wasn't going to tell Aizawa now, not in a moment of unconsidered rage. It was too likely he would regret it later. He met Aizawa's almost soft stare with something stony. He needed someplace private to scream, and Aizawa was getting in the way of that. "Is there something about the interview I need to know?" Aizawa said after a solid 5 minutes of silence. "Probably," Shoto gritted out. "Excuse me." He made to leave, and found himself wrapped in Aizawa's scarf. "Todoroki Shoto," said Aizawa, cold and hard and professional. "We are in the middle of a crisis. This is no time to withhold information. Shoto set himself on fire. The flames blinked out after a breath. They left singes on the capture weapon. Ask Nedzu, spat Shoto, twisting to face Aizawa. He sticks his face in everything. I wouldn't be surprised if he knew about Midoriya ahead of time, at this rate. With that he left. Aizawa let him. He walked to his room and stood there. Just stood there. He should be doing something, he realized, but all he could do was stand there. Midoriya. Endeavor. The government. Crying would be good. Crying might keep him from attacking someone. Crying didn't happen. He turned a slow circle. Bed, window, picture frame. The picture was of his mother, no one else. His mother. He could talk to her. Mind made, he slid out the bedroom door, down the hallway, out the building. A guard tried to stop him at the gates. I'm going to see my mother, he snarled. Let me through. Nedzu's voice appeared over the loudspeakers. Be back in 2 hours. There's no need to remind you that we're still under lockdown. He would be back when he would be back. If he would be back. He left. He jogged up the path, past an old couple walking their dog, past a businessman talking on the phone, past a head of green hair painfully like Midoriya. The receptionist seemed almost afraid of him as he stalked up to the counter. He reined back his temper with effort. He had sworn when he was little he would never terrify people like his father did. His mother was waiting at the door for him, eyes worried as she took in his fragile, tight composure. He collapsed to his knees and regurgitated the news. Midoriya's arrest. Midoriya Inko. The government investigation. The government oversight of endeavor abuse. His mother took him in her arms, still ever so cautious and wary of hurting him. He let himself soften into the touch. I don't know what to do, he admitted into her shirt. Her grip tightened. Shoto, she whispered into his hair, you can't help the government being what it is. I don't know if that's possible. But you can help one person who's hurting. Tell me about Midoriya Inko. He took a deep breath and refocused. Later. The hurt and rage could come later. Right now, there was someone he could help. Right now, he needed to be a hero. Nedzu said she's in America for protection, he said. He gave me her email. I wrote a note to her, but she hasn't answered it yet. You are in contact with his mother? His mother asked, hesitating, so cautious to give advice when she didn't wholly trust her mind. Tell her she's loved and mean it. She held him a moment longer before releasing him. It's important, right now. She would know. He accepted this with a wordless nod. Should I tell her now? Her smile turned melancholy and proud. Please, she said. Please, help that woman as soon as you can. He pulled out his phone. Midoriya Inko, he wrote, self-consciousness somewhere far away and unimportant. You need to know that you are loved. People care about you and want to help. Please let us reach you. He hit send. I want the woman's email, his mother said, her voice gone fragile. Please, Shoto. He gave it to her. She accepted, hands shaking. Shoto realized that neither woman had someone to talk to for a long, long time. Maybe it would help. He hoped so. Whoosh. Shoyuta landed and took off in a swirl of scarves. Whoosh. Touchdown, takeoff. Whoosh. Touchdown. He settled on the corner of the tallest building in the district, balance steady in the oncoming wind that carted through his hair. From here he could see not the movement of individuals, but the glowing network that was the city at night, and more importantly, the blur of black wings on black sky. Nomu. He first spotted it early yesterday morning, and as yet, it only circled the district, far above the blaze of city lights. Other underground heroes were coordinating an attack plan. His role was to keep constant watch on the creature and not let it fly away into the night. Where possible, do not engage. Nomu quirks relied heavily on physical mutations, something his quirk did not counter well. It was not a logical matchup. Far distant, the Nomu eased out of its circling and tidled east. He followed in an easy whirl of cloth. Touchdown, takeoff. Touchdown, takeoff. Rooftops skimmed under his feet in a fast blur of tiling. It was a simple assignment, for all its deadly importance. He was the scout, not the brute force. The tracker on his belt did almost more good than he himself. So long as he kept in sight of the Nomu and answered all requests for position, his job here was done. Left time to think. Midoriya was top of his mind, and would remain so for the foreseeable future. Midoriya, who was arrested on charges of conspiracy and infiltration. Midoriya, who had been crying when they took him away. Midoriya, who lived in precarious balance with the man that leveled All Might. Midoriya was a naturally unbalancing force, with a quirk under his skin that was more a death sentence than Shoyuta had ever realized, with a will that could not be held down by law nor quirk. Put like that, he peripherally understood the reasons the government seized Midoriya in the first place, and put like that, he could see the father in the child. The Nomu circled once, straight overhead, and dived intimately close. Focus undiluted by his thoughts, Shoyuta dove with it, free-falling through open air until the Nomu caught itself 10 feet from the ground. Shoyuta mirrored the Numu's skimming dive, landing on cat feet on a low balcony. The Nomu cried once and took again to the sky. Steadily climbing back up the buildings, Shoyuta mentally mapped a status report of the dive, the escalation of an alarming pattern. Nomu were supposed to be mindless, able only to follow simple orders. This Nomu wandered aimlessly, circling without purpose and now diving at random. It was as if the Nomu did not know how to achieve its purpose, or, Shoyuta thought, as if it had no purpose and simply wandered, a lost child in a monstrous body. The thought of lost children brought him back again to Midoriya, a child kidnapped by a terror of a man. Scientists claimed that Nomu were people cobbled together in a sickening mishmash of bodies and quirks. There was no guarantee All for One would not turn the process on his own son in part or full, to pacify resistance and gain control of the quirk that defied him so long ago. There was also no guarantee that All for One would attempt anything at all on his son. He had chosen not to interfere when Midoriya entered the field of heroics, and had chosen to interfere, violently, when Midoriya was imprisoned in Tartarus. Anything was possible, but given the man's tendency to level city blocks as collateral damage, Shoto's mind tended dark. The numinative again. Shoto followed. It came to nothing again. No snatched citizens. No citizens around at all. No destruction of property. Nothing, nothing, nothing. It was as if the Nomu were searching for something. Or someone. That might be it. He clicked on his receptor, hair and scarf swirling as he pressed the receiver to his ear. Eraserhead reporting in. I'm following the Nomu, which shows no signs of aggression. It circles and dives frequently. I believe it may be looking for something. Over. Static cracked in his ear. Poison Dart reporting in. Our team is ready to go. Do you know what the Nomu may be tracking? Over. I don't know, but I repeat, all engagements have been non-aggressive. Over. Understood. Over. Slipping the receptor back into its hook, his eyes tracked the Nomu, which had circled overhead for the entire conversation. Unease crawled up his arms. It was as if the Nomu waited for the conversation to end. As if the Nomu were perfectly aware of and attuned to his presence. Testing his theory, he reversed the tables, now not following the Nomu, but swinging away and allowing the Nomu to follow him. Near-silent wing beats tracked him down the corridor of rooftops. He had seen the top speed of this thing. There was no way to outrun it. He stopped and clicked his receptor on. Eraserhead reporting in. The Nomu is tracking me. Over. Silence over the line. The Nomu circled overhead, watching. Waiting. We are in position 6 streets down from you, Poison Dart said. Think you can make it that far? Looking up, he watched the slow, drifting circles of a hunter that had no intent of capturing its prey. It had too many opportunities it had already refused. Affirmative, he said, coiling into a lunge. Be ready. Touchdown, takeoff. Touchdown, takeoff. Wing beats followed, almost stalling in the air to keep pace with him. 3 streets. 2 streets. What? He skidded to a stop amid a shadowed group of heroes, Nomu almost on top of him. The next few seconds were a blur of action. Light lit the street like it were morning. Flare signal. Arrows hit the blinded creatures. Poison Dart. The earth writhed underfoot. Shatterpoint. Between it all Shoyuta dove, twisting his scarf round the Numu's legs, binding limbs and ragged claws to the creature's chest. It was over, far faster than any hero movie would have people believe. The Nomu lay, blinded and bound and sedated, in a heap on the concrete. Poison Dart strode up and emptied a full syringe into the creature's skull. That will keep it down for the next 48 hours, she said, slapping the Nomu with a meaty thwack. Eraserhead, status report. The Numu's claws had caught him across the shoulder, but it wasn't anything he hadn't dealt with before. I'm fine. The bigger concern is the Numu's behavior. It seemed undirected for most of the flight. It must have caught sight of me on a dive and followed. And if it followed, why didn't it attack? Shatterpoint mused. Ask your principal for his thoughts on the matter. We'll do some investigating of our own. Was there any other aberrant behavior? It didn't attack civilians, Shoyuta said, walking over to unwrap his scarf from the unconscious Nomu. It seemed to avoid human contact. None of the streets we dove on were populated. What streets were you on? Poison Dart asked. Shoyuta rattled them off. My impression was that street selection was random, he added. Your intuition is dependable, Poison Dart agreed, but we'll check it out anyways. Get some rest, Flare Signal said, his first contribution to the discussion. This Nomu targeted you, other Nomu might as well. Now he was Nomu bait. Fantastic. He nodded, realized he had nothing more to say, hitched his scarf to a nearby rooftop, and whirled back into the night. It wasn't a graceful exit, but that wasn't a priority. Getting this news to Nedzu was. Did the Nomu target you specifically, or did it target the nearest person? Nedzu mused, steeping his paws on his desk. You did say no one else was around. I don't know, Shoyuta said, nursing a cup of warm tea that did little to fight the dangerous, comfortable blur of exhaustion. It never encountered anyone else. Strange, in a city the size of Mustafa, Nedzu said. It avoided others. So why did it target you? It should have attacked me right away, Shoyuta said. It was still bothering him. Ignoring the tactical advantage of confronting me alone, I doubt Nomu have the intelligence to delay a command to attack. Very astute, Nedzu said, something in his eyes terribly fascinated. This is indeed a puzzle. I will consider the matter, but for now, you have a class to teach. The sun was rising, which meant that the preschool rush of the Class 1A dorms would soon tumble into action. More importantly, students would soon be knocking on his door, haunted and drawn, asking for a private discussion about classes, about personal concerns, about Midoriya. He stood. I'll keep in touch. Nedzu waved him out the door. He reshuffled his brain from Nomu and Midoriya to classroom management. Todoroki was still on silent edge from the interviews. Kaminari was prone to startling. Ajui's voice was hoarser than normal. She was good at asking for help when she needed it, so he expected her presence at his door in the next few days. He exhaled, slow, and let himself into the main floor of the dorms. It was going to be a long day. Evening found him hunched over a map of the city, diagramming the route the Nomu and he had tracked hours before. That afternoon, another Nomu had been brought down. He had submitted a request for details, but didn't expect a reply until morning. Why had the Nomu targeted him, specifically? It had avoided all other human contact. It was almost as if the Nomu could tell the difference between a civilian and a pro-hero. It was possible. Preliminary doctor reports suggested that this Numu's mind was far more intact than other Nomu. But a creature that recognized a pro-hero should have set into the pro-hero immediately, not waited for the hero to get help. It was as if the Nomu wanted heroes to capture it. As if perhaps became walking out the door to speak to Nedzu. The principal was still in his office. Nedzu, Shoyuta said. That Nomu wanted to be captured, didn't it? Was it following orders? The look in Nedzu's eyes weighed on Shuta's soul like a hammer on a bending nail. Nedzu, he said again. The principal's tail curled in. Yes. Yes, it wanted to be captured, or yes, it was acting on orders? Yes. Whose orders? Shigaraki never would waste a cheat code, Nedzu said in lieu of an answer. It took a moment for the reasoning to settle in Shuta's chest. When it did, All for One commanded the Nomu, not Shigaraki, he said, crashing into the follow-up revelation. This has to do with Midoriya. Silence from Nedzu. That was answer enough. Ice ran through Shuta's heart. Why did All for One do that? He demanded when it was clear Nedzu wasn't talking. Nedzu looked small, then and burdened. I cannot say. I do know he wouldn't do it without very good reason. You understand this is merely conjecture. Your conjecture is close to fact. Nedzu looked, if anything, more worn and weary. All for One would not sacrifice pieces as useful and expensive as high-functioning Nomu without gaining something better in return. I almost do not want to know what Midoriya promised in return for the easy surrender of the 3 Nomu brought down today. 3? Nedzu nodded. Another Nomu was captured 45 minutes ago. Shoyuta worked through that in silence. His Nomu had not attacked him since it was looking for a pro-hero to arrest it. It had followed him into an ambush on direct orders, because Midoriya had decided the capture of high-quality Nomu was worth whatever freedom he had traded away. That Midoriya would negotiate with All for One, that All for One would accept, spoke of a frightening level of trust Midoriya showed in his father. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing, he could to protect Midoriya from his father's manipulations. He dragged a hand over his eyes. You should have told me as soon as you figured it out. I needed to know this, Nedzu. Nedzu's tail slumped. I know. But I had my own demons to wrestle with. He looked up, hesitant to intrude on the principal's strict boundaries. Nedzu read his look at a glance. No, you can ask, my friend. I am not doing well with the unethical imprisonment of one of our students, not with my history. He should have considered Nedzu's position sooner. Nedzu's tail dropped lower. I truly hate to say it, but given Tartarus's handling of Midoriya, he is almost safer with his father. What do you know? Shoyuta asked, words tight. Nedzu's face went blank. They had him strapped to a chair and wall, drugged him unconscious multiple times, and were preparing for intensive questioning that was no doubt unethical in the extreme. That was all in the 5-hour window before his father intervened. Shoyuta clenched his jaw. That was bad. That was worse than he had thought, and he had thought poorly of the government to begin with. That was straight-up cruelty, aimed at a child who had no notion of his supposed crimes. And Nedzu, his past was not dissimilar to Midoriya. Little wonder he was struggling to communicate about Midoriya's case. Little wonder All for One had intervened. What else do you know? He pressed, cautious of Nedzu's boundaries. Not much else. All for One is a master of covering his tracks, and he is sparing no expense in hiding Midoriya. The rest was left hanging, unspoken, unheard. It was enough, though, to wring Shota's chest. This was Midoriya. Reckless, brilliant Midoriya, who might even now be trying his hand at outstrategizing his centuries-old, century-sharp father. It was a venture with little to no possibility of ending well. He nodded at Nedzu, sharp with pained gratitude, and left the room. He needed space. He needed to process. Usually, he slept in the gap between the end of the evening and midnight patrols. There was no sleep tonight. It was Saturday. Midoriya had been taken on Tuesday. Only now was it beginning to sink in that Midoriya truly wasn't coming back. Fumikage bowed his head for his fallen classmate. Midoriya always managed to get in the worst trouble. It should have been no surprise that eventually he would wind up in trouble with the law. The thought was cold comfort in the face of his friendship with the boy. They had never been dearly close, no, but they had a certain understanding of each other, a mutual quietude that manifests itself in the truest expressions of self. Midoriya had been a comrade, kind and gentle in the classroom, and fiercely determined in battle. Midoriya, who was gone. He was just resigning himself to the fact, dark shadow tucked almost comfortingly under one arm, when Jaire's ears jacked into the wall on an idle search through student news, went white, then red, then pale. She had heard something she shouldn't have. He was no expert on the workings of the mind, but he knew the pressure of dark thoughts, even overheard ones. He stood to offer silent assistance. Jaire's eyes jumped to his, jittery, uncertain. Tokoyami, we need a class meeting. She had overheard something serious, then. He nodded and moved to gather the others. No, Jaire said. It has to be completely secret, do you understand? Of course he did. Dark Shadow hissed, insulted. It was only natural that the overheard news was of a secure nature. If it affected the class as Jairu so implied, their teachers would have told them the news otherwise. Tokoyami, Jairu said, winding her left jack tight around one finger, it's about Midoriya? Puzzle pieces fell into place. Japan's arrest records were highly confidential. Of course the news was about Midoriya. He nodded, once, and went to find Tsuyu. She had a head for organizing groups, and wisdom enough to do so discreetly. Behind him, Jairu collapsed onto the couch he had just vacated, face blank. It wasn't good news then. He hurried a little faster. Tsuyu contacted Koda, who contacted Shoji, who contacted everyone else. Before evening, right before evening in Ishido, Bakugo and Ida's cases, as no one trusted them to keep quiet from the teachers for long, the entire class knew that someone had news about Midoriya, and they were going to share it that night. They met in common room. Mineta kept glancing over his shoulder. Tokoyami stared straight ahead, but he couldn't blame Mineta. Eyes in the back of his head was practically Dark Shadow's job description. Everyone was on edge and anxious at being caught. Fumikage half-expected Aizawa-sensei to come stalking through the door, despite Logic's reminder that Aizawa-sensei had a scheduled patrol tonight. Technically, All Might was supposed to be monitoring them tonight, but he was still withdrawn and silenced from Midoriya's arrest and no one pushed him on it. It worked out well in their favor this night, Fumikage thought rather guiltily. What's the news, headphones? Bakugo barked. And how sensitive is the information? Jairu wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Midoriya's in trouble. And the information is very sensitive. You should have led with that, headphones. I'm keeping watch at the door so no one sneaks up on all your asses. You're with me, Grapehead? Mineta had no chance to do more than protest as he was dragged off into the night, Bakugo overriding his words with, if you don't want to get caught, then be useful for once. Silence among the group. Clearing his throat, Ida spoke. I truly hate to deny news of Midoriya, but classified information is kept private for a reason. Todoroki grunted. Don't be self-righteous about breaking the law, Ida. Now shut up. Ida did. Jairu started to cry, quiet, trailing tears that she reined in with visible effort. Uraraka and Kaminari huddled around her, whispering confused, alarmed comfort until Jairu got herself back under control. It's Midoriya, Jairu blurted. He was arrested because of his father. The words jerked out, faster and faster. The man All Might defeated at Kamino, that's Midoriya's father, and he never knew about it until Tuesday. And the government arrested him for it, and an uproar, hastily muffled for fear of the teachers coming in. Shiro clung to his elbows. Aoyama threw himself on the ground, dramatic but heartfelt. Todoroki burst into flames. Fumikage just stood there, Dark Shadow winding around him and whispering of all he could do to the government agents if only Fumikage let him. Edging closer to Todoroki's flames on stiff feet, Fumikage stifled the urge. This took up so much of his concentration that by the time he could focus on his classmates again, they were engaged in a furious interrogation of Jairu, who was twisting her earphone tighter and tighter around her finger until it looked like it was going to snap. Enough, he said, terse from the effort of reigning in Dark Shadow. The prison staff is sightless and cruel, but Jairu was not the cause. Jairu tugged her earlobe even tighter before releasing it with a sigh. I don't blame anyone, she said, flat and heavy. I feel the same way. Todoroki shifted in the background, the threat level radiating from him dreadfully familiar. Fumikage knew at a glance that his classmate was fighting demons of his own. Their eyes locked. Todoroki, eyes seething, looked away first. And ran, careless and wild, out the door into the night. I'll go after him, Ida said, glancing at Fumikage. He shouldn't be alone right now. Leave him, Fumikage said. Judging from the darkness in his eyes, he is going to set alight the first person he comes in contact with. Ida hovered, helpless and angry and desperately searching for a job to occupy his mind. Fumikage cast his eyes around the group and landed on Uraraka, knees to her chest on the couch. I believe Uraraka might appreciate your assistance, he told Ida, who nodded sharply and left. You don't understand, Jairu said, voice flat with pain. That's not the worst of it. A shudder ran through the group, horrible and expectant. Midoriya's father broke out of prison and broke Midoriya out too. No one knows where they are, Jairu reported hollowly. The teachers have been looking for days. I'll kill that man, Dark Shadow roared into Fumicage's skull. You can't stop me. Light. Fumikage yelled as Dark Shadow wrested control. Bakugo and Todoroki were gone. Aoyama. Now, it was going to be a massacre, he thought. He had dreamed of it often enough. Shadows took him, strangling through his tendons, biting off his lungs. He roared, light skittering away before him. The temperature dropped. One hand, abject fear. On the other hand, visceral satisfaction. Light burst the night open, a laser blast skidding barely past him. Someone get Bakugo, someone yelled from very, very far away. The shadows claimed his eyesight. From then on, the world was a mass of blind shouts and screams. Explosions rocked the night. Bakugo. Dark Shadow weakened. More flares of light through his hazed vision. The sound of panicked yells. Midoriya would have had a plan to deal with it, Fumikage assumed. The thought only added to Dark Shadow's rage. More footsteps. A hazy mind fog. He panicked. Dark Shadow could take many things from him, but Dark Shadow had never taken his consciousness before. He was going to lose complete control. Tokoyami, a familiar voice shouted. Midnight. Stop fighting it. His brain dimmed further toward sleep. He let go. He snapped awake to a dry kiss. Dark Shadow. Rampage. Was losing control. He was. Easy, there, Recovery Girl said, heavy and slow. No one was hurt except for you, Tokoyami. Under her breath, at least until Aizawa gets his hands on the lot of you. What happened? Fumikage muttered. You suffered a few burns from Bakugo's explosions. I've patched you up, but your left arm will be tender for a few days. Be gentle with it. He nodded. Aizawa was called back from patrol. He is going to address the class as soon as you make it back to the dorms, Recovery Girl said. You can stay here for a few minutes to gather yourself. No, Fumikage interrupted. I must go and face the consequences of our mutual actions. Yes, Recovery Girl said, so soft and sad that she sounded for once her age. You must. He pried himself from the cot, feeling Dark Shadow stir under the bright lights of the infirmary. Don't, he mentally snapped. You have done enough damage for one night. Midoriya, Dark Shadow whispered, so ashamed that Fumikage remembered for a moment that Dark Shadow was really an extension of himself, not some foreign power to rest under control. He's in trouble. I know, he thought, striding down the corridors of UA with false confidence. I know, Dark Shadow. The class was assembled, a silent corridor waiting for him, when he swung open the door to the dorms. A glance at the clock revealed much time had passed since he went unconscious, at least an hour. The class, then, from their slumped positions and quiet stillness, had already done much of the initial grieving for their classmate lost to the strangling grip of the stranger at Kamino Ward. He had missed the beginning of grieving his classmate, but that was all right. He already knew his grieving must take place in solitude, for fear of losing control of Dark Shadow yet again. Aizawa-sensei glanced up from his seat at the back of the room as Fumikage stood lost in thought. Tokoyami, he said. Recovery Girl said you suffered minor burns from Bakugo. Are you hurt in any other way? Shaken, yes, but hurt, almost regrettably not. Pain grounded him, gave him a focus point to block out Dark Shadow. No, he said. Aizawa-sensei nodded once. Now, he said, turning to the class. Where must I start? You've all broken my trust, again, by gathering to share deeply classified information that we withheld from you for good reason. Jairu raised her hand, blank-faced. I shared the information, sensei. The fault is mine, no one else's. Aizawa pinned her with a glance. The fault lies primarily with you, but everyone else knew you would share information on Midoriya's case and failed to inform a teacher of it. His eyes swept the class, frustrated and tired. You are all suspended from hero training for 2 weeks. Jairu, you are suspended from school for the next month. Use the time to consider the importance of protecting classified information as future government agents. A ragged chorus of yes, sensei, went up. Aizawa-sensei leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. That said, you now know pretty much all we know on Midoriya. What I am about to say does not leave this room, understood? Another chorus of assent. Really? Aizawa said, opening his eyes with professional solemnity. Because you all have just proven to me that you are willing to leak information when it comes down to it. It was Yaoyorozu who took the lead, bowing low to the ground. We formally apologize. We were worried about our classmate, sensei, and failed to consider the legal implications. It will not happen again. Good, Aizawa said. Now listen. Midoriya was taken to a high-security prison and sentenced for life. I cannot tell you anything about his current living situation since I know nothing, but should you ever come in contact with him, you must be fully aware of his legal status as an escaped criminal and your status as heroes in training. Tense silence greeted this declaration. I am not telling you what to do, Aizawa-sensei said, ever so carefully. Fumikage knew the art of choosing one's words with care, and realized he was standing in the presence of an unsung master. But you must be aware of your legal obligations in any official interaction with Midoriya from here on out. It's not fair. Uraraka burst out. He didn't do anything at all. Be very careful with your language, Aizawa said, still as the grave and just as watchful. From here on out, that is grounds for official accusations of sedition, especially from a future government agent. Fumikage could read behind his teacher's stilted language, could hear all the words Aizawa-sensei was ever so intentionally not saying. It's our duty, Fumikage said, clear and firm. As future heroes? Eyes turned to him, accusing, furious, betrayed. Fighting the government now would get us arrested, he continued. And then how could we help anyone? Our public actions must follow the letter of the law, so we are in positions to be the heroes Midoriya saw in all of us. His unspoken words started to ripple through the class. We must obey the government so we are in a position to change it. So we can help Midoriya. I vow to be a better hero, Ida said, standing. For Midoriya's sake, I will not rest until injustice is purged from our society. I will not let villains of any form rest until they are brought to justice. Me too, Uraraka said, watery voice laced with steel. I agree, Yaoyorozu murmured. Solemn determination wound through the room. Heads bowed, shoulders straightened, eyes firmed. Into the growing resolve, Aizawa-sensei said nothing. He only nodded, once, and stood to leave. Losing Midoriya to such a grim fate had been a sickening blow, Fumikage knew. Yet somehow, the world spun on and Class 1A with it. They were going to spin together a better world if it killed them. With such clarity of purpose and unity, he could not see how they could fail. Dark shadow, small in the careful grip of Fumikage and blaring overhead lights, whispered vicious, vengeful agreement. 3.5 years later, trailing his fingers through the soft steel of his scarf, Hitoshi sauntered down the street. There were rumors of a new Yakuza forming from the homeless rejects of society, and it was Hitoshi's assignment to stop any uprising before things escalated. So far, he had learned only that the homeless were cold, hungry, and anxious. He understood the idea behind the Yakuza. Society turned on people with little enough reason, and outcasts banding together for safety was smart. But there was real danger in leaving the outcasts to gather under a banner of government defiance, particularly when the Yakuza pulled from such a broad, ignored base. Government change was more than necessary, but this wasn't the way to do it. Scuffing his shoe against paved cement, he slouched against a nearby brick wall to read his surroundings. A passerby might see his heavy posture and take him for a drunk, for a tired civilian, for a college student. Wrong. Under his skin simmered 3 years of UA training and more than 8 months on the job. Movement. His head tilted sideways in time to catch a newspaper peel off the sidewalk and flutter around the corner. Movement again. A man moving at a shuffling walk. Underground patrols were 19 parts high alert nothing and 1 part brutal action. The goal of today's mission was information gathering. The less action, the better. A couple passed, chattering away. Shinsu's eyes tracked them, his quirk bobbing at the scraps of conversation floating past. Hands shoved in pockets, he felt more than heard his phone vibrate against his leg. He fished out his phone and hunched over it, eyes half closing against the flare of his screen brightening the midnight dark. Caller ID, Aizawa. What happened? He asked, voice low. Classified, Aizawa said, voice breaking up in the poor cell reception. Get to the police station once patrol is over. An old woman crossed the street. A cat wound its way past a light post. Nothing out of the ordinary. If he left now, he could pick up the investigation tomorrow night. I can be there in 5. But you can't affect the situation, you can only be informed of it. Finish your patrol. Beep. Aizawa had hung up. Hitoshi straightened, shifting his weight from the brick wall back onto his knees and ankles. Patrol went on. Little happened and nothing of note. One mugging. One group of men that gave him a wide berth. Many homeless, all asleep or faking it well. No new information on a Yakuza. Dawn broke. Detouring his last lap of the area, Hitoshi headed for the police station. Above-ground heroes would meet at a hero agency. Underground heroes preferred the nearest police stations to facilitate police communication and avoid upkeep fees. The receptionist pointed him to a back room. Sliding through the door, he found at least 24 bodies crammed into the room, humming with low conversation as a monitor streamed blurry footage of a man stabbing a tattered body over and over. Aizawa caught his eye from across the room. Shinso elbowed his way over. There's been a confirmed sighting of Stain, Aizawa murmured into his ear, the man's face half buried in scarf. We're processing what to do next. Stain. A villain, a murderer, a legend. Free. Stain should be in Tartarus. Are we sure it isn't a copycat? As you were a student, Aizawa said, voice low and calm, you were not informed that Stain broke out of Tartarus at the same time as Midoriya and All for One. Top heroes led a national search, but after 3 years of no activity, we assumed he was dead or lying low. Hitoshi's mental falter was entirely contained, the result of an adolescence of training. What changed? Tonight, at 11:43, someone attacked the hero Starscream. Authorities intervened just in time to save their life, and their testimony, along with multiple quirks, confirms the attempted murderer to be Stain, who has been posing as one of his own copycats. Stain copycats were on the rise. It would be easy enough for Stain to avoid notice merely by varying his technique to a bad impersonation of his signature style. A mass murderer that cunning was a real threat. The pack of bodies in the room now made sense. What's been decided? Shinso asked, glancing at the monitor. Starscream lay unnaturally still as Stain, over and over, jabbed daggers into broken flesh. Nothing of value. Heroes are receiving another national alert to search for Stain, but no one can agree how to start the investigation. Hitoshi listened with half an ear to Aizawa and half an ear to the tone of the room. Must be joint partners with the police if... Do our best work alone unless you want. Insist on informing the public of. The politics won't move for hours, Aizawa said, deep-set exhaustion lining his words. For now, just be aware of the situation and wait for further instruction. You will be mobilized soon enough. And you? I'll be briefing Ida and Todoroki as soon as this meeting gets out. Both his former classmates were good matches against Stain's Quirk, but still, why them specifically? Classified. Go home and get some rest. He knew the cadence of Aizawa's voice. Hard professionalism. It meant he wasn't getting any further answers tonight, and maybe not ever. Fine. He left the crammed room in favor of the streets. He needed space. Not space from Stain, though his murder spree was an issue. No, he needed space from the reminder, however oblique, about Midoriya. 3 years later, it was still an open wound. Midoriya has been arrested for nothing more than a relationship with a villain. What was to stop the government for turning on him and his stigmatized, mistrusted Quirk just as quickly? The government couldn't be trusted to be fair, and he was an underground government agent. The knowledge had carved his professional career. Work alone, work in silence, and never, ever give the government reason to doubt him for fear he would end up in Tartarus. Tartarus. He was one of a select few of his classmates to know that Midoriya had been processed and held at Tartarus. The knowledge burned, low and hot in his stomach, fanned all the more by the knowledge that he could be stripped of his own hero license should he tell any of his friends such critically classified information. Glass broke behind him. He came back to himself with a snap. He had wandered far afield of his route home, too comfortable in the knowledge that his Quirk would protect him from anyone who talked back. Now, he was in the shadowed part of town, the pacing ground of the truly dangerous gangs. Any hero recognized as such would have their throats slit. Above-ground heroes only ventured these streets in group raids, futile efforts to crack down on anything more than the outskirts of organized crime. It wasn't safe territory unless you belonged here, and not only belonged, but established yourself as a legitimate threat. Even veteran criminals walked warily here. Hitoshi bit his tongue as he worked to arrange his face into something appropriate. He had to avoid being too casual. Those that looked at ease in such settings were the most dangerous by a long shot, and locals would know those faces. At the same time, looking too nervous or jumpy was an open invitation to be robbed. Balancing wary with focused with inconspicuous, Hitoshi was so busy perfecting his facade that he almost walked into earshot of a truly dangerous aura. He felt it before he saw it. A presence so towering, so dominant and collected that he was diving for shaky cover, facade abandoned, before he more than half processed the threat. There were two presences, he realized, edging forward in grim curiosity. A tall figure and a shorter one, both dressed in black cuts of cloth, both at ease in the cutthroat streets. Don't understand why the government would pass budget cuts to the welfare program when the program's so broken already. Hitoshi froze. He knew that voice. Almost. Where did he know that voice? You know better than most about the government's complete inadequacies, the taller man said, almost amused, and puzzle pieces snapped into place with sickening finality. This voice he recognized from deeply classified recordings that even underground heroes had trouble accessing. Only Aizawa's influence had got him past the security checkpoints to hear All for One's recorded voice, oozing threat and disdain. And if this was All for One, then the shorter figure was, what? He slid his head around the corner, heart jackhammering, to the sight of Midoriya at his father's side, projecting an air of understated, absolute confidence. He jerked back behind his scant hiding place before any attention could be drawn to him. Even a corrupt government should want to avoid tens of thousands of people blaming the government for abandoning them, Midoriya grit out, standing unafraid at his father's side. You overestimate their logical capacities, All for One said, still amused, still dominating and collected. Izuku, do you remember the child with mind control you fought in the sports festival? His stomach dropped. Hitoshi coiled against sudden death. Yes? Midoriya's voice hesitated. Shinso, I remember him. Come out, Hitoshi Shinso, All for One called. Gathering his scarf, gathering his courage, Hitoshi stepped out. Fingers coiled in a death grip on his capture weapon, pathetic protection against the man who leveled all might. The first thing that registered, terror pricking on the back of his neck as he slid into the streetlights. The second thing that registered, Midoriya still wore red shoes. Midoriya's eyes flicked up and down him, assessing for damage, for threat, for who knows what. Greetings, Hitoshi Shinso, All for One said. It is late enough for an underground hero to be to bed. Yet here you are. He knew from others what his quirk felt like, numb, buzzing static that took over all thought. He felt like that now. Here I am, he agreed, mostly on autopilot. What do you want? The question lay burning, an open invitation, a hopeless trap. Said All for One. Izuku, tell your friend I am well aware of his quirk, though not displeased he has the presence of mind to use it under the circumstances. Tell him if he ever speaks of this encounter he'll be a corpse by morning. Hitoshi's quirk pulsed, snagging the edges of the words, unable to act without a direct response. Midoriya only nodded. I'll tell him. There's some other things I want to tell him too. A pointed pause. Alone. 5 minutes. 5 minutes, Midoriya agreed, frighteningly easily. All for One's form wavered and vanished, and Hitoshi found he was breathing shallowly. A long silence. Hey, Shinso, Midoriya said, so casual that it burned, like nothing but time stood between the two of them. Dressed in a dark hoodie and those dumb red shoes, Midoriya for a moment could have stepped out of Hitoshi's memories. But no. It took less than a handful of seconds for Hitoshi to dismantle that assumption. The baby fat gone from his face, the sure posture a stark contrast from remembered twitchiness. Midoriya was older and wiser than Hitoshi's memory. Hitoshi had imagined Midoriya younger, somewhere between the youth of high school and the sporadic, blurry images from security cameras that left most of Midoriya's features to the imagination. This Midoriya, now, was a man, not a child. Midoriya mistook his silence. He truly is gone, I promise. Well, Hitoshi said, still wresting control of his heart rate. Well, you're out. On the streets. Looking like you belong here went unsaid. Midoriya shrugged. I have been for years. Incredulousness had a brief fistfight with dread, and won. You're out on the streets for years. When the entire underground and high-ranking heroes after you. With him, I couldn't not help people, Shinso. I'm good at staying out of sight. That was the thing about Midoriya. No matter how much had changed, no matter Midoriya's sure posture on gang-encrusted streets, he still answered Shinso's words without hesitation. He could take Midoriya right now and never forgive himself, then die a gruesome death at all for one's hands, or he could leave right now and exercise all his underground training to never let a flicker of pain betray this encounter. The answer was oblivious. The execution, painful. You're safe? He asked, hovering on a back foot. Hitoshi had learned the sit down, shut up, your life is on the line tone from Aizawa. He used it now. Tell me the truth. Yeah, I am. Yeah. He had heard enough about Midoriya to know the man would always lie about his safety if it put someone else's mind at ease. Midoriya, he said, slow and patient, words an open invitation to respond. Are you safe? If you don't give me a convincing answer, I'll drag an answer out of you with my quirk. I really am, Midoriya said, quiet and firm. I'm important to Father, emotionally and strategically. Strategically? Hitoshi felt his heart plummet. What had Midoriya done? I'm not allowed to explain. But I'm safe. I promise. Listen. Can you tell All Might and Nedzu about this? I'll make sure you're safe. But they've been worried for years, and I haven't been able to get a message that I'm okay to them. Shinso nodded mutely. Midoriya glanced away then, eyes flickering to his phone. That's 4.5 minutes. I've got to go. His brisk tone softened. Be safe, Shinso. The pause. Midoriya raised his voice and his eyes. This man is under my protection. Don't touch him. Footsteps, only now audible, backtracked behind him. Hitoshi closed his eyes in brief, fierce self-blame. He should have had his guard far, far up. With Midoriya, he had unconsciously let it down all the way, to his near-fatal regret. Midoriya gave him a long look. You shouldn't be in this part of town. Sorry, this tastes horrible. Black slime coated his lungs. By the time his body snapped alert, he was already somewhere else. Aizawa's office, the man watching him in tense, heavy measure. 5 minutes. Nearly to the second. Midoriya was obedient, too obedient, sickeningly obedient, yet for all that he was warm and kind as he had been as a child. Shinso, Aizawa was saying, urgent and fierce. Shinso. That quirk is registered under All for One. What happened? The words rang, loud and distant, in Hitoshi ears, the long, low peal of a death bell. All for One's death threat if he told anyone. Midoriya's reassurance, plea, that he could tell others. Are we being recorded? Hitoshi said, catching his bearings with almost professional calmness. No. I found them. By accident. Aizawa's eyes focused to near-deadly sharpness. Define them. All for One. A pause as his heart processed what his mind had just experienced. And Midoriya? Sit. Hitoshi did. Can you wait 20 minutes? He could. He said as much. Write down everything that happened. Every detail is important. I have to make some calls. Which was how, 15 minutes later, he found himself reciting the encounter to Aizawa, Nedzu, All Might, and an unknown woman with a government badge. He had given Aizawa a flat look at the woman's presence, but she had only looked at him gravely and shook his hand. Nisbetera, she said. Not all in the government respect how Izuku Midoriya's case was handled. I am one of them. Aizawa nodded, slight and sharp. At that, Hitoshi let himself recount the encounter, glancing at his sheet for details about time, location, state of mind. He didn't need to check for Midoriya's wording, that, he thought, would be burned in his memory for the next several years. He was kind, Hitoshi murmured, and obedient. He paused, well aware that this wasn't objective, before adding, I hated that. You're not the only one, All Might said, the words a weary breath. It's not blind obedience, though. Hitoshi's head snapped up. What do you know? Heroes across Japan captured dozens of unresisting Nomu since All for One and Midoriya's jailbreak, Aizawa cut in. No Nomu sightings have been reported since the last capture 2 years ago. Shame curdled in his stomach for doubting Midoriya, followed swiftly by alarm. What had Midoriya bargained for all those Nomu? Obedience was probably only the start. Tara broke into the conversation, then, voice politician neutral. You said that Midoriya sent you here with the quirk All for One displayed at Kamino? More horrific implications. Hitoshi remembered Bakugo's strained confession of nightmares about that quirk, but he hadn't realized it was the same thing until others pointed it out. He was foolish. Naive. What was Midoriya doing with his father's quirk? Yes, he said, knocking his head against the back of the chair. Yes, he did. Tell no one, Nedzu said, tail coiled around his lap. It is far more damning than mere relationship. There was something Hitoshi was missing here, something critically important. He could tell it from the shift in Aizawa's posture, from the note of alarm in Nedzu's voice, from the stiff posture and clenched, folded hands of Nisbet Tara. He racked his brains. Nothing. Tell me why, Hitoshi demanded. His father forced a quirk on him. That's terrible, but not his fault. Everyone exchanged glances. Everyone but Hitoshi. You can best safeguard this knowledge if you don't know why, Nedzu said at last. Tell no one. Part of being a pro-hero was knowing when to be discreet. Hitoshi nodded, forcing back the frustration burning at the back of his throat. More questions, going over and over the same information. No, Midoriya seemed relaxed around his father. No, Midoriya didn't seem hurt. Yes, All Might, he was certain. Yes, All for One definitely knew he was there and could identify him from a glance. Yes, that was more than concerning. He held off his panic at the last realization until everyone left. All Might lingered at the door, but Aizawa caught his shoulder. Give him space, his mentor said. All Might left. Hitoshi breathed, slow and careful. Midoriya wasn't a child trapped in memory, he was a fully capable adult, operating under the direction of All for One. He probably had been for years. And Hitoshi was one of a select few who knew the full extent of Midoriya's peril. Breathe. In and out. In and out and in. A pile of blackness piled in front of him. In a moment, Hitoshi was on his feet, mind sharpening, compartmentalizing, mind catching up to the realization that he knew the ooze that coded him not an hour before. So I thought you Woyles probably panic a bit, Midoriya said, as stridently at ease inside a hero's apartment as he was at his father's side. If Midoriya's cooperation with All for One was the price for keeping away the Nomu, there were both professional and personal reasons to tread carefully. You shouldn't be here. His quirk caught on the edges of Midoriya's words as Midoriya spoke. Yes, father and I did argue about that, but I'm safe with you. The raw trust it took to speak to him, so unconditionally, was rare enough in his colleges. From Midoriya, trapped on the opposite side of the law, it was stunning. And you're safe from father. I made sure of it. I made sure of it. Chilling with what Shinso knew of the Nomu. You have permission to be here? The words tasted like ash in his mouth. That's what I came about. I knew you'd be worried about that. You're living under the orders of All for One, Hitoshi said, voice flat and heart hammering. Give me one reason I shouldn't be worried. He promised to never make me do anything immoral. You're living in the most criminal part of town. Midoriya's smile, quiet and still and burning with secret knowledge, was the calm evolution of his determined, all-might grin of childhood. Yeah, but illegal isn't immoral. You're underground, Shin, so, you know that. All of 1A knew that as soon as we learned why you got arrested, Hitoshi said. Shinso? Midoriya's voice shifted to something hesitant. Was everyone all right after I got arrested? No, people weren't all right, Hitoshi snapped. You're underestimating how much people cared about you, Midoriya. You were the pillar of the class. Midoriya fidgeted his fingers on the table. That's not quite what I meant. Were they all right? Midoriya, Hitoshi realized, wasn't asking if people were angry and worried. He was asking if Class 1A had been able to keep moving, to keep chasing their dreams of making a better world as heroes. He thought of Todoroki, single-minded, dead-set attitude toward cleaning the government of injustice. He thought of Shiro, forever more serious and solemn under his laid-back manners. He thought of Uraraka, determined to bring mercy to a merciless system. Yeah, he said. Yeah. He remembered what he had been told of Tokoyami's careful, hidden vow to make the government pay for what they did to Midoriya, and the class's quiet vow to follow Tokoyami's lead. We wanted to make a world you would be proud of. Midoriya started to cry, smiling like sunlight through rain. I really am proud of all of you. You're all doing so much good, I've seen it. You should be with us, Shinso hissed, suppressed truth finding sudden outlet. You deserve to help more than any of us. Shinso, Midoriya said with gentle patience, cheeks still wet with happiness. What makes you think I'm not helping people? Shinso opened his mouth. Shut it. He hadn't really known Midoriya as a 1A student. He knew this, that Midoriya had chased after him, all tear-stained, firm encouragement, after he beat Hitoshi in the sports festival. He knew that Midoriya had waved shy, hopeful encouragement to him when they passed in the halls. He knew Midoriya's reputation of unwavering determination and success from his classmates. He knew that Midoriya truly loved people. You're a vigilante? He couldn't comprehend a world where All for One would allow that. Midoriya made a face, almost comical. Not really. He leaned forward, abruptly intense. I admire heroes, I truly do, but our society is slow to recognize how much good anyone can do, not just heroes. I'm not a hero, and I'm not a vigilante. I'm just helping. Where I can. And there's a lot to do. You mentioned a deal with All for One, Shinso said, coiling around the information like a cat around prey. This is part of it, isn't it? I can't talk about it, Midoriya said, calm and sure. That's a yes, Shinso said. Nodded. Made up his mind. Listen. I want to help you help people. What can I do? I don't think, Midoriya said, then paused. Oh. There is something you can do, but it might risk you as a hero. What is it? You're assigned to the group targeting the homeless? Shinso re-evaluated his opinion of Midoriya on the spot. He had thought Midoriya a helpless captive. This knowledge, though, was the work of a massive, subtle information network, for underground heroes were notoriously private about their affairs. There was, as always, far more to Midoriya than met the eye. Yes. Continue your investigation in Atomy, Midoriya said. That will help me. Shinso nodded. He would have to find some justification for moving his operations 2 towns over, but he could do it. Without question. Thank you, Midoriya murmured, standing. Are you doing all right? I will be. Good. Midoriya grinned, then something quiet and comforting against the backdrop of fear. A hero's smile. Be well, Shinso. You too. Always, Midoriya said, spinning in place a little as he dissolved into black gunk. Shinso breathed out, slower and gentler than before. Midoriya was living with All for One. Midoriya was wanted by the law. Midoriya was still brilliant to watch, and maybe there was hope yet. So the investigation hasn't progressed much, Shinso summarized. There's not much to work with. He squinted up at Shoto. Not that I'd expect a hero like you to take a case like this. The pause. No offense. Shoto's stomach twisted. None taken, he said, but watching Shinso's face twitch, an old pain cue, he found he didn't manage to keep the bitterness out of his words entirely. Street networking just isn't your style, Shinso said, voice flat. You know that better than I do. Yes, Shoto agreed. It isn't. In fact, he had been assigned to the Stain investigation, but his father had raised a professional fuss, citing Shoto's previous interaction with Stain as proof that Shoto was a loose cannon around the man. Thus, he found himself shoved to Shinso's case. The reassignment hung low and hot in his stomach, fueled by political hatred of just about everyone, but it wasn't Shinso's fault. He tempered his voice. Outside politics assigned me here, he monotoned. Tell me more about the investigation. Why are you searching in Atomy when initial reports start in this city? Something ghosted across Shinso's face. Something hesitant. I got an anonymous tip-off to look in Atomy. Something was off. And it had to do with the expression on Shinsu's face. Why move your entire operations? Shoto pushed. It makes more sense to stay here. There's action here. Shinsu's face went almost condescending. This is why you're no undergrounder. Anonymous tips are essential. I trust it? Shoto's stomach flared, arcing into real anger. Obviously. I just question your decision to trust it so completely that you stop operations here. Shinso stood, looming. This is my investigation and you. Cold clarity sliced through boiling fury. Shinso was defensive. Too defensive. Shoto had spent years teaching himself people's emotional spectrums, and Shinso hadn't registered as this prickly since Shinso transferred into Midoriya's 1A slot. Except for when Shinso tried to hide how Aizawa mentored him privately. Shoto met Shinsu's wary eyes. What are you hiding, Shinso? Questioning my expertise, and I'm not hiding anything. For an underground hero, that was a pretty shoddy lie. Shinso, if you're going to lie about your investigation, I'll report you for deliberate hindrance of an ongoing case. You're paranoid and you know it? Shinso glared. Slower now, realization processing, Shoto let out a breath. Who are you protecting? A shot in the dark. A good one. Shinso stilled and coiled and tensed. Shoto stared back, unflinching. Shinso shifted his weight, ran a hand through his hair, muttered a curse. Fine, he muttered. The tip-off was from someone on the other side of the law. I promised to protect their identity. Satisfied? Criminal informants were common. Shinso being this evasive was rare. Opening his mouth to say as much, Shoto paused. Was the person very wanted by the law? Shinso gave a stiff little laugh, more a cough than anything else. Very. Shinso had got in contact with a crime lord? Wanting the competition out of the game, maybe? Or maybe Shinso had got in contact with the Yakuza they were investigating. Maybe Shinso was covering for them, protecting them in exchange for information. The possibilities were endless. Todoroki, Shinso said, a little caution in his voice. What is it? The last time you had that face, you accused Mina of being an alien spy. That had been idle conjecture. This was the history of Shinsu's criminal involvement. Clearly, some outside investigation was necessary. Shinso groaned. This is another of your conspiracy theories, isn't it? Shoto didn't rise to the bait. I'd better get started on the investigation, he said, reaching for the packet of information. Thank you for the briefing. I would hate to take any more of your time. It's no, Todoroki, whatever you think it is, you're wrong, you're off on another. Have you seen a purple-haired man around here? Shoto asked, taking a step back as his interviewee leaned away. He was being too intense again. No, just some weird guy in a hoodie, the man babbled. He gave me some food real nice, excuse me, sir. Shoto let the man hurry away, closing his notebook with a snap. Nothing, and he had been at this for nearly 2 days. Shinso was covering his tracks well. He would just have to keep looking. He found another likely candidate sitting at the corner of the street not 5 minutes later. People watchers like this were always good sources of information, even if they didn't know it. Describe any unusual people you have seen in the past few days, he told her, notebook at the ready. She looked at him like he was crazy. Do you know how many people pass by every day? She asked, turning her shoulders away from him. He sighed and let her be. He delved deeper into the slums. Here, people watched him with wary, skittish eyes, and he found no luck until he changed out his hero costume for something more mundane. He surveyed his new outfit in the mirror. Gray jacket, faded camouflage pants, hair dyed black. He looked more or less like the people he saw on the streets. Walking around the corner into an alleyway, he accidentally completed the part by tripping face-first into a pile of rubbish. Reflexes utterly abandoned him. By the time he got out, cross and disheveled, his shirt was stained with grease and dirt and something curiously yellow. Fantastic. He was just brushing himself off when someone cleared their throat behind him. Already bracing for some fan gleefully uploading a video of pro-hero Equilibrium face-planting into a trash heap, he turned. A woman with worn shoes and eyes steely with compassion. That was quite the fall. You look like you could use a hot meal. I can get one for you? She was waiting for a name, he realized. Deku, he said, the word falling out his mouth before he processed it. Her slow nod indicated she didn't believe his name for a second, but she said nothing except, I'm Akagi Kaori. It's a pleasure to meet you, Deku. Somewhat bemused, Shoto followed her when she gestured, followed her into a back-alley soup kitchen and found himself eating a thin, steaming bowl of soup in short order. How is it? Kaori asked. Shoto swallowed. Good, he said. The food wasn't objectively delicious, not to his high-class palate, but it was filling and it was hot, and that was more generosity than he expected from a stranger interacting with a supposedly homeless man. His investigation on Shinso had found nothing, but he had learned all too well how desperate and overlooked the homeless were. To his shame, he had never considered the matter before this week. There's more where that came from, Kaori said, nodding to his bowl. If you're interested. He wasn't, not really. The bowl of soup was almost good, and he was taking it out of the mouth of someone who actually needed it just to ask Kaori if she had seen Shinso talking with a gang leader. Speaking of gang leaders, Kaori's all-too-innocent words sounded quite like a lead-in, a double message, a promise of more than food if he stayed. A promise to he'd better investigate this. I'd be interested, he said, cautious and slow. What's the catch? Kaori's smile twisted in understanding. I know it sounds like there's a catch, right? There's not. There's a group of us that just want to help the homeless. I know the person in charge of all this, and you'll never meet someone with a bigger part. All you have to do is not talk about us to others. That sounded a terrible lot like a recruitment pitch. Shinsu's words echoed in his ears. Our assignment is a new Yakuza that's recruiting from the lowest members of society. Homeless, convicts on parole, the works. He might have found them. On accident. After tripping into a trash heap. It sounds too good to be true, he murmured, swirling his spoon through the eddies of soup and deciding to go for the throat. Why can't I talk about it with other people? There's people who don't like what we're doing, Kaori said, readily enough. They'd stop us if they knew about us. People, Shoto echoed. Rival gangs? Her face twitched. We don't like to consider ourselves a gang, but yes. He forced his face blank, to hide his controlled triumph and caution. This was very likely his Yakuza. People, like the police? He asked, managing to spit enough bitterness into the last word to sound convincing. There was enough latent anger at the legal system to make the task easy enough. Yes, she murmured. The government would not approve of such unconditional kindness. Kindness. That was one way to put it. Recruiting an army of disillusioned citizens, though, that was another way to put it. He knew, core deep, the sterile cruelties of the government, but a violent revolution would only make things worse. Still, he had to swallow several more spoonfuls of soup before he wrestled enough of his doubts away to ask, "How can I help?" "You have this backwards," Kaori said, smiling through guarded eyes. "We want to help you. And I want to help others." That was true. That was what made this assignment so abruptly difficult. Bowls of soup and a few kind words were kindness, and he was here to punish it. He had to remind himself that it was what came next, the requests for brute force assistance and suggestions that he keep the right company, that were so dangerous. Kaori's eyes softened. Let's get you back on your feet before getting you set up in the organization, right? Do you have enough cash to stay afloat? Offers of money, to indebt him to this Yakuza. Classic. No, I'm good, he said, tipping his bowl to slurp up the last of the soup. You're sure I can't help right away? We want to make sure you're okay first, and... He sneezed. Soup flew, onto his shirt, onto the floor. Onto his hair. Dripping down individual threads of hair, washing away his patch job of a hair dye and revealing snowy white underneath. His disguise was fragile enough, with his scars still visible. Paired with white hair, Kaori stood, face wavering into something colder, warier. Equilibrium. Imagine finding you here, in the slums. People were turning to look. Murmurs broke out. Somewhere behind him, a door slammed. A teenager eyed not him, but Kaori warily. What are we going to tell me? Stop talking, Kaori snapped. Equilibrium, you have one chance. Leave quietly. Leave now. What are we going to tell me? What are we going to tell? Shoto slid out of his seat and made his way through the now silent room, heart pounding. It could be anyone. Truly, anyone. Sheltered under the name Deku, though, he couldn't help but hear the echo of Midoriya's name anywhere, everywhere, even in this. Shinsu's hesitation. He was protecting someone with desperate, mulish fervor. He turned, careful in his self-possession, locking eyes with Kaori, and fired a wild, hopeless flare signal. I miss him badly, you know, he said. He was the best of us, Midoriya. The woman's shudder of defiance and fear told him what he needed to know. Was the person very wanted by the law? Years of bitter searching, years of bowing his head to a corrupt government in exchange for the legal power to look for his friend, years of biting his tongue and his temper. And he found Midoriya here, at the head of a rising yakuza that claimed it only wanted to help people, only wanted to give the homeless and societal rejects a chance. By all that was true, that claim was probably accurate. He slowly became aware of the room still frozen around him. He bowed, once. Midoriya will never be harmed under my hand, he said, a world of pain and dedication in the words. If Midoriya asked it of him, he would join Midoriya even now. Especially now. Villains and governments on the rise, corruption seethed through the streets as Midoriya swept through the abandoned shadows. Thanks for the soup, he said, for lack of anything more articulate, and walked out the door. Behind him, the room exploded into a quiet roar. Midoriya looked up from charts of the city as Akagi strode through the door. His black shirt red tank top. It billowed in the sudden breeze of the entryway as she left the door hanging, taking in the sight of the young man greeting her with a startled, glad smile. She drank in the smile with pained warmth, knowing full well that she was about to kill it. Kaori, Midoriya said, smile wavering but holding out. What is it? I wasn't expecting you for another 4 hours, still. She drew a deep breath. How could she explain this? I tried to recruit Equilibrium, then sent him out the door to the police. I may have just assigned your arrest warrant. Worse. Though from what she could tell, Midoriya's arrest warrant had been signed for years. Kaori, did something happen? Midoriya said, shifting to stand. Can I help? Recruiting went south, she said, slamming the words out mechanically. I didn't realize I was talking to a hero until too late, and he recognized that you were the power behind this organization. The smile slipped. Midoriya's calm mask, ever present, slipped just a little. Ooh. Equilibrium. Flicker of relief? Longing? Before the mask sealed back onto Midoriya's face. That's all right then. He was your classmate, Akagi said sharply, but that's no reason you can trust him. He's bound by law to report you. Shoto doesn't care much for the law, Midoriya murmured, standing. I don't think he'll report us. A hero who doesn't care for the law, Akagi repeated, disbelief welling up in jerks. What? How is he even a hero? Midoriya shrugged, a tinge and only a tinge of helpless curiosity creeping into the movement. Shoto is unusual. Hesitation. I'm pretty sure he stayed on the hero track only to change the law, to show he's better than his circumstances. I can't think of another reason he'd keep on as a hero. His circumstances. Midoriya was betting his safety on one hero's circumstances. He's the son of the number one. You're completely, positively sure he's not going to report you? Quite. Shoulders back, relaxed, hands extended to comfort her, Midoriya's calm gravitas was ruined only by tank top blaring between the two of them. I promise, Shoto is going to do nothing like turn us into the law. The words hit a chord, soothed her despite frustrated, fearful misgivings. Then we were lucky. Anyone else? Midoriya's mask opened again, revealing a half-wild exhale that spoke volumes. Akagi remembered a time when the mask was a sparing necessity, not an eternal constant. Midoriya had grown up and grown inwards, since then. Anyone else, Midoriya repeated, pulling out another fold-out chair, and we'd be in massive trouble. Here, take a seat. Tell me what happened. She did. She recited finding a frustrated, grease-stained young man at the entrance to an alley, recited taking him to the nearest soup kitchen and gauging his interest in joining their network. He had been cautious and probing, enough to raise a hesitant red flag, when Soup washed the dye clean of his hair and revealed equilibrium. That was where things went really wrong, she said, settling forward in her seat. Till then, it was just bad luck that we got a hero. What was the son of the number one doing in the worst part of town anyways? But then Hunter panicked and let half your name slip. Equilibrium guessed the rest of your name, and then I panicked and confirmed it, she said, swallowing self-blame. Midoriya had his hands propped on his chin, watching her as if he could watch the scene itself unfold if he watched intently enough. He said. You panicked. That's going to happen again. He shook his head as she opened her mouth to protest. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that as an accusation. You were under a lot of pressure and you handled it well. All I mean is that I need a different operating name so no one can slip my real name by accident again. She thought it over for a moment. The idea was solid, another layer of failsafes, but only heroes and villains use aliases, she said slowly. This is only going to fuel the rumor that you really are a rising crime lord. She regretted the words as soon as she spoke. Midoriya was on the run from the law, already considered undesirable, and under his mask hid an uncertain young man with far too much history in his eyes. Midoriya flinched, barely noticeable, but then his face set. Okay, he said, sounding more fragile than he had in years. I think that's what we have to do. He was probably right. The thought was no comfort. Right? Midoriya said, clapping his hands together with far too much efficiency to be genuine. Operating names. The mask didn't so much crack as waver, uncertain. I'll take Dragon, Akagi said promptly, recognizing Midoriya's hesitation for what it was. Eyes jumped up to meet hers, startled. You don't need an operating name. I'm in as deep as you are, she said, wrestling cheer into her voice. I may as well follow your lead. You aren't wanted by the law, Midoriya murmured. You're doing this so I'm not doing this alone, right? Cory. Midoriya was, as ever, too perceptive for his own good. Midoriya, she mimicked. Let me do this. It will bring me peace of mind, if nothing else. You're right about us needing operating names. He looked at her, sharp and intense, and let the matter drop. But what should my operating name be? They're already calling you Wraith for how you disappear into thin air, she said, and regretted it when she saw the look on his face. It doesn't have to be that. Fine. I'd like it to be something to do with helping people. Helper, she suggested. Midoriya made a face. That makes it sound like I'm helping people, not helping them. Yes. What about Dikair? No, the heroes will recognize that one. She ignored Midoriya's trailing mutter. Let's go back to Wraith. It does suit you, for all its negative implications. She ticked off the points on her fingers. You're always disappearing into nothing. Your existence is like a phantom. You work in the shadows. Phantom, Midoriya interrupted. That's better than Wraith, at least. It suits you, she agreed, for all the reasons I just mentioned. Phantom, Wraith, Spectre, Spirit, Midoriya said, lapsing into another mutter. What about Spirit? I think I like it. Spirit. She examined him, examined his unyielding drive and near-fatal kindness. He had the brightest spirit she knew. Yes, she agreed. Do that. Do Spirit. Okay, said Midoriya, taking a deep breath, stepping into the role. It was nothing he hadn't done over the past 3 years, but somehow, it felt significant. Eyes settled, face compassionate steel, he donned, removed, the mask. We're set then, said Spirit. All we need to do is let others know of the change of name. Understood, said Akagi, said Dragon, and the moment passed. Speaking of aliases, Midoriya said, slumping easily into his chair, what alias did Equilibrium use? Oh, it was weird, she said, trying to fish out the right syllables from her memory. Obviously fake. It had to do with suffering. Something coup? Yes, death. Midoriya's face did a strange little jump at that. Oh, he said, but I'm still trying to imagine him in our soup kitchen. He pulled a wry face, half affectionate, half bemused. About that, she murmured, stomach twisting, but the point had to be made. We're really not a soup kitchen group anymore. We're organizing night watches and drilling everyone in street skills and creating a warning network for when hero fights are nearby. An outsider would see a Yakuza posting guards and training recruits and avoiding the law, and that's kind of what we're doing. I made sure everything was perfectly legal, Midoriya said, voice soft, almost dangerous. I know, she said, biting her tongue in frustration, in discomfort, but that's only because the government has no idea we exist. If they knew what we were doing, it would definitely be illegal. Midoriya slumped, picking at a shard of wood on the table. You're right. But what else can we do? No one else is helping these people. I'm not saying the government is right to disallow our actions, she said carefully. I just want to know where this is going to lead us. The word Yakuza echoed loud between the two of them. They sat in silence. A fly buzzed. Exhaling sharply, Midoriya spoke. I swore when I was little and again a few years ago that I would never become a villain. If people decide to see me as a villain, that's different. But I'll never become one, even for a good cause. I just won't. He had the charisma and wits to pull it off, she thought, before cutting that train of thought short. Midoriya had said no. That would be good enough for her. Still, and if the government decides we're villains, no matter what you say? Midoriya winced. They've already decided I am, so I guess it's not that much of a change. But you, his voice solidified. I'm not going to let you get in any more trouble with the law. What I decide to do with my life is not dictated by you, she fired back, and his eyes dropped away. You're right, he said, soft and tired. Forgive me. I only want to see you safe. The words hung in the air a moment, dripping with weight. Midoriya considered the words and flinched. What is it? She asked, laying aside her temper. He nodded his hands in the base of his shirt. My father said something similar to me. That's why I can't do certain things. My words were too forward and controlling. Please forgive me. Forgiven, she said, startled and wary at the rare mention of Midoriya's father. The family relationship was complicated, she had gathered, and not altogether legal. You're all right? With your father, I mean? It's all right, Midoriya said, looking like there was no word in the world for his relationship with his father. Kept safe. And I can help people. So it's Red flags whipped up in the back of her brain. She knew the relationship was tense. She didn't know it was, whatever this was. You would tell me if it's not okay? Midoriya forced out a fake smile, almost a real one. Of course. Liar. She would have to keep that much closer an eye on him. I'll tell the others about Spirit and Dragon, then, she said, prying herself from the seat and wishing that, for once in his life, Midoriya would be a little more honest in his vulnerabilities. Shoto shut the door to Shinsu's office with a bang. I know you were covering for Midoriya, he announced with absolutely no preamble. Shinso nearly dropped his coffee. How did you go from conspiracy theories to that? Shinso said after a beat, settling his cup on the table with an audible click. You should have told me, Shoto swept on, undeterred. You know I've been looking for him for years. Why would you? Because you're no undergrounder? Shinso snapped. Your quest for Midoriya was always foolhardy. What were you going to do with the information after you had it? Run off and tell the police? Keep it secret and hope you would never slip the information by accident? You're an above-grounder. You aren't trained to hide information, let alone something of this magnitude. I would help him. Shoto cut in hot and furious, betrayed. I would give him support, help him cover his tracks. The government wouldn't. I almost left the hero track after Midoriya was captured, and nearly again when I was 18 and moved out of my father's house. Do you know why? The government showed it was more than corrupt and uncaring. I stayed half to be in a position to help Midoriya and half to have the influence necessary to change the government. I don't care if the government hates me. In fact, I want them to. Shinso looked sharply down at him. Do you understand what you were saying? The government is no small enemy. I thought it was the job of heroes to go after the big enemies. Okay, Shinso said, breathing out a sharp exhale. You're still foolhardy, but you're determined. You need training in hiding information, then. Shoto laughed, short and unhappy. What makes you think I'm so poor at it? Shinso gestured lazily at the whole of Shoto. No offense. It's not like you're worse than any above-grounder. Shoto worded though his mental checklist. Did he trust Shinso? Would Shinso tell? Was the situation worth it? He needed to make this point. Shoto settled into a chair opposite Shinso. I keep secrets much better than you give me credit for. Tell me what you know about quirk marriages. This is still a stupid idea, Shinso said, slumping along beside him. You said that there were government agents who protested Midoriya's handling, Shoto said. If there's already cracks in the government, I intend to take full advantage of them. Start with the people on the streets, Shinso reiterated. I told you, they've been helping me ever since Midoriya said I was under his protection. He made a face. They keep bringing me food, like I'm not eating enough. You aren't, Shoto said on automatic. You're as bad as Aizawa. But I know politics better than I know back alleys. We discussed this. You take the streets, I take the politics. I hate politics, but I have the clout for it. And where do you plan to start? You can't walk in the main offices and announce you're looking for any supporters of Izuku Midoriya. I can pull political pressure off Midoriya's so-called Yakuza while you scout out what Midoriya needs. You'd need a pretty heavy distraction to make the government forget about an up-and-coming Yakuza, Shinso said. I doubt your homeless proposal is going to work. It will if we can show that government aid for people on the streets reduces Yakuza involvement. He was dead certain this was the case. No one cared for the people on the streets except Yakuzas and Midoriya. Give the homeless some real support, and he expected Yakuza involvement to drop sharply. Never mind that it would help Midoriya's cause of caring for the homeless immensely. If we prove Yakuza rates drop with a better welfare program, no one's going to bother with a Yakuza with no crimes to its name, he said instead. Proving that will take time, Shinso stressed, lengthening his steps. Shoto hurried to catch up. You'd need a massive distraction in the meanwhile. Shoto snorted. Like a son of the number one sponsoring a program that he claims will drop all crime and Yakuza involvement? More. You don't understand how wrapped up the officials are in the Stain and League of Villains cases, Shoto snapped. I was assigned to your case not because people are taking Midoriya's Yakuza seriously, but because my father wanted me out of the way and gave me over to the most remote case he could justify. Shinso stopped. Sir, you should have mentioned that earlier, Shinso said. I thought the son of the number one on this case was a sign that the government was deeply invested in this case. Shoto barked out a laugh. Nope. Everyone important is focused on getting Stain back under control. Bitterness twisted together with relief in Shinsu's face. Right then. This mad scheme of yours might actually work. Footsteps behind them, heavy with purpose. They both turned. A man in a ragged overcoat flicked his eyes between Shinso and Shoto. Shinso seemed to grasp what was happening first. He's with me, he said, nodding at Shoto. And he knows. He's fine. The man spared another glance at Shoto before passing a folded note over to Shinso. Shinso jerked out a nod. The man bowed and left. Shoto stood there, watching as Shinso unfolded the note and scanned it before passing it over to Shoto. It was in Midoriya's hand, the cramped, tidy scrawl hardly unchanged from Yue. Stain will attack tonight, it read. Looks like you're part of the Stain investigation after all, Shinso said dryly, taking the note back and tucking it in one of many pockets on his jacket. Looks like it, Shoto agreed, numb with how easily Midoriya reached out after 3 years of nothing. Reached out to Shinso, not Shoto, and that stung and ached in equal measure. You're an above-grounder, Shinso had said. You have a legal duty to report Midoriya to the police, Aizawa had said. Did Midoriya trust him so little? I suppose that means an extra patrol for me tonight, Shinso carried on. Any guesses where Stain will hit? Alleyways, Shoto said, dragging himself out of his head with a jolt. Stain goes after the heroes who care about publicity more than the poor, so not the alleys in the poorer part of town. Other than that, Shinso started walking. I might have to recruit other undergrounders to cover an area as big as not the poor part of town. I'll say it's an anonymous tip-off. I'll join you, Shoto said, catching his stride to meet Shinsu's. Shinso half-twisted around. You mean you'll try and go against the number one's direct wishes since you hate him? Same difference, Shoto murmured. Silence from Shinso. And more silence and more. Shoto glanced over. Shinsu's face was blank with repressed judgment. What? Shinso sighed. Stain goes after the heroes who aren't heroic. A revenge quest against your father isn't very worthy to him. Shoto's eyes slid away. I suppose? Think about it, Shinso said and walked on. Tuning in to the heroics radio channel, Shoto adjusted the radio in his ear and rehearsed the upcoming confrontation with his father. Our investigation revealed an anonymous tip-off for the Stain case, and Shinso and I judged it necessary to. Static snapped and popped in his ear. West side of the bridge. No activity, Kendo was reporting. Other heroes signed on to leave equally dull reports. His cell phone rang. Glancing at the caller ID, Shinso, he picked up. I've talked with my contacts, Shinso said, clipped and efficient. They agree that the most likely targets for Stain are Juniper, Mount Lady, Doomstalker, and he paused. Uravity. He was invested now. Understood. Doomstalker and Mount Lady are patrolling near each other on the north end of town, Shinso continued, an edge of contempt in his voice. Shoto snorted. The north side was rich, full of camera crews and heroes but quite lacking in criminal activity. It was the perfect spot to land an interview without putting in much hard work for the night. I assume they're in the most danger, Shinso said. A double kill would look good for Stain. They've each got an underground hero on their tail. Juniper and Uravity haven't signed onto the radio for the night, so we're still locating them. We should have them covered in the next 10 minutes. Got it, Shoto said, and for the sake of Uraraka, he added, I'll join Uravity, just to be sure. All right. Beep. Shinso had cultivated the habit of hanging up before any awkward farewells could be issued. Shoto appreciated that. He dialed Uraraka's number. Nothing. She picked up on the fourth ring. Todoroki? Is something wrong? Formalities were unnecessary, so Shoto skipped them. We received a tip-off that Stain would be active tonight, and you might be a target. I want to patrol with you. There was silence over the phone for a moment. I can't say I didn't expect it, Uraraka said at length. I've been pretty clear on how I'm working for money, right? I was just leaving on patrol, so I'll join you. I'm at the intersection between... Shoto pressed, disliking the pause. The pause lengthened. By the new bridge, Uraraka rushed out, voice strained. Todoroki, Stain. Clatters rang in Shoto's ears, like the phone had been dropped. Uraraka? Nothing. Uraraka? Nothing. My, purred a voice straight out of Shoto's adolescent nightmares. Look what we have here. Gasps of pain. Shoto broke into a dead run, icing the path ahead in a desperate bid for speed. Ah, but you have company on the phone, Stain's voice continued, tinny with distance. Let's just... Breath, intimately close to the phone's microphone. The line went dead. Shoto dialed Shinso one-handed. Bring. Hello. Shinso, half wary, half annoyed. Uraraka, Stain, North Bridge, now, Shoto half-shouted. Shinso cursed and hung up. Shoto was on the opposite side of town. Maybe Shinso was closer. Maybe not. His heartbeat rang loud in his ears. Too late. The television filled with the grainy image of a newscaster shoving a microphone in Uravity's face. With news of Stain's escape, talk of heroes turning down money is trending. You have been quite vocal in refuting this position. What is your take? Uravity smiled, leaning toward the microphone. I think it's silly. I've talked about how I use the money I make as a hero to support my family, and I stand by that. Working for money isn't evil. Everyone does it. That's all. The television fizzed off. Achiko nearly closed her eyes from pain and terror. There had been so little time between seeing the dark, ragged silhouette and her dropping like cardboard, knee to the stomach and knife to the throat. Her body was more statue than real, stiff under Stain's calloused hands. She didn't know when he had taken her blood. Terror crested as Stain fingered her phone, caressing the screen as he hung up on Todoroki. Todoroki. He had heard the situation and would call backup. She only had to survive until then. She could stall. Stain crouched down, breath close on her face. Now he purred. Where do I start with you, Ochako Uraraka? Venom dripped off his tongue as he spoke her given name. You defile the name of heroism by your very presence? My family, she snapped, is not a defilement. You openly work for money. He took out a short knife, spun it, and dug it deep into her side. Agony. You don't have even the shame to hide your love of fame and fortune, he continued, relentless. You flaunt it relentless old. Blood. So much blood spilling out of her. And then you go crying to the cameras about how noble it is that you work for money, he growled. It's a disgrace. I have had my eyes on you for long enough. Working, for my family, she grit out, gasping for breath, is good. Stain's face darkened and he whisked out another knife, plunging it into the space between her third and fourth knuckles. She screamed. Movement behind her. She couldn't move, couldn't do more than open her mouth to tell the newcomer to run. That's enough, a new voice cut in, far too plain and young to witness a killing. She couldn't move her fingers. She couldn't move her fingers. Thumb, forefinger, yes, but everything else. Stain's face contorted in startled wonder. He stood. Midoriya. She didn't register the word at first, too caught up in pain and panic. Me, the voice agreed. Leave now. Midoriya. The name flooded her in a rush of panicked awe. Ever so minutely, her body relaxed inside its stiff prison. You have a true hero's heart, to stand up even for the toxic fakes, Stain said plainly. That is why I must exist, to purge the fakes you would die to protect. Footsteps drew closer. Red shoes, half unlaced, entered her field of view, stopping inches from Stain's boots. Uravity is no fake. She might be after this, if she couldn't use her hand, Ochako thought with wild desperation. If there was an after this to speak of. Stain growled, something guttural and warped. She openly admits to heroing for riches? I'm working, my family, she gasped through pain. Deku, get out? No, Deku said to them both, kneeling down, turning his back on Stain to squeeze her uninjured hand and drag the knife out of her broken knuckles. Exit pain. Again, Ochako screamed. Hang in there, Deku whispered, brushing a hand over her bloody knuckles. Pain eased. Stain took all of this in impassively. Your noble efforts come at too great a price, he said. Even now, heroes rush to the scene. You know the cost of capture, prisoner 037. Deku, go, Ochako whispered, imagination catching at the idea of prisoner 037. Better me than. The rest of the words died in her throat, stifled by thorns. Death this close was undeniably frightening. No, Deku repeated, more forceful this time. Stain, she works for money, not riches. You must see the difference. Seeking any compensation corrupts a hero's purpose. Move, Midoriya. I am not past paralyzing you if I must. I'm not moving. She heard the movement of air as knives whirred out. And then, death in the air, in her nostrils, in her lungs. Choking, suffocating, relentless death, radiating so strongly it might as well take her immediately. There was no movement of air. There was no movement of anything. Time stood still. And then Deku let it go. Don't, he said, soft and quiet and oh so threatening. I am not the frightened boy you met before. Clearly, Stain murmured. Tell me why you still fight for the heroes that betrayed you. Just a hint of Deku's death trance returned. The heroes, he asked, voice strange and distant. The heroes never betrayed me. The government did. Heroes work for the government. Surely you know this, Prince of the Underworld. Deku drew sharp breath. Don't call me that. You prefer Wraith these days, I hear? Or was it Spirit? Betrayal lies on every side, no matter your name. Ochako breathed through the pain. She had heard of Wraith. People had approached her, back when she shopped in the poorest parts of town, saying there was help available from a man named Wraith. She had denied the help. Surely others needed it more. Had she always been that close to finding Deku? Had she been fated to wait until death's door? She could feel herself fading even now, comforted only by Deku's presence and the warm tingle in her broken hand. Have mistaken working for money with working for riches and power, Midoriya was near shouting. You've never worked with the homeless. How dare you? Your ideology is as corrupt as what you fight against. Harsh words from one who seeks the same as I, Stain purred. We both aim for a world free of the miserable corruption of our government, a world where heroes fight for justice, not government-sponsored fame. Justice is only half. Midoriya's voice was frightening. True heroes seek mercy and you have none. You have enough and to spare. It's made you almost soft, hasn't it? I run the shadows too dark for you to tread as your father does. Achiko closed her eyes, then. Stain and Midoriya were increasingly loud, the grimy alleyway was increasingly bright, and the sensory input stabbed at the inside of her forehead like ravens ripping out from her skull. She drifted. Hands shook her, violent and painful. Her side ripped, and she buried her face in the ground to keep from screaming. She could move, but not much. Blood loss, her brain helpfully provided, was quite critical at this point. Her side, Deku hissed. What did you do, Stain? If she dies? I dealt with the faker as suited me, Stain retorted from somewhere impossibly far away. It is as I just told you. Doctors heal wounds in society, but amputate rotting flesh to save the rest of the body. So it is with the rot of the hero fakes. Deku took her arms, ever so gently, and tugged her onto her unwounded side. You'll get out of this, he breathed in her ear, voice absolutely determined. He let go of her. He stood. The air changed. The temperature dropped, not in the air but in her lungs. Pure dread rolled in the air. This was Wraith, she thought dizzily, not Deku. Through vision blurry with tears of pain, she saw Stain's eyes narrow. You're a promising pupil of your father, young spirit. But don't think you can intimidate me. You deal with the homeless. I deal with the hero fakes. I deal with you, Wraith said, so cold that it hardly registered as Deku's voice. Get out. Stain laughed, then grim and tired. This is why I let you interfere with me. You're the only worthy one who stands up to me. I'll need you around when my work is done. The vortex of dread faltered. You want me to kill you, Wraith said, something twisting in his voice. It was the most real emotion, not the projected calm or terror of the last few minutes, she had heard out of him. Achiko wished she had energy enough to stand and look into Deku's face, wished with a wild, desperate ache that did nothing for the stiff agony of her body. When my work is done, Stain repeated. I am not unaware of the blood on my hands. I thought my work would never resolve, but if you apply yourself... Footsteps on the street, dozens of footsteps, rushing around her like a stream parts around a stone, seizing Midoriya, aiming cracking spears and acid guns at Stain. No, don't, Achiko gasped out, shoving herself upward from her slouch and nearly collapsing. Her sight went blurry, and she was pulled backwards into someone's arms. Stay put, Unraveling, the woman breathed into her ear. We cannot risk any distractions in confronting Stain and Midoriya. Good job keeping them talking until now. No, I don't. So it goes again, Stain said, lifting his head to meet the eyes of the assailants. Yet this time, I am uninjured and fresh. Midoriya, remember well my words. Remember mine, Midoriya said grimly. Until next time. Electric spears shifted to cover Midoriya, fired. Uraraka tugged away as electricity coursed through. Black goo that splattered to the concrete beneath. Stain seized the moment of distraction, flicking knives in every direction and, instead of going for the cuts of blood, sprang away upwards onto the light pole, then away into the pooled darkness. Unraveling, someone was calling. He sounded more panicked than tired. That was serious. Hands took her shoulders, eased her into a sitting position, wrapped bandages tight around her hand and side. Her hand whispered dull anxiety. She still couldn't move it. Voices swam in and out of focus as she allowed herself to crash. Deku was gone, Stain was gone, everyone was gone. Not Shinso. He took her hand as she shook, raising his voice in sporadic intervals as suited him. Necessary to interview, someone was saying. My dead body. She's hurt, you can wait. Everywhere. Her shoes stuck to the concrete, trapped alone with Stain, she couldn't move. Todoroki was there, then, asking something she couldn't hear through the garble in her ears. Shinsu's garble answered. Vaguely, she recognized the signs of shock. Fair enough. Todoroki? She opened her eyes, when had she closed them? Yes, Todoroki, lighting a small fire just for her. Deku was here. She breathed, quiet enough that only Shinso and Todoroki could hear. Is Stain stopped for him? Shinso squeezed her hand. Todoroki's flame flared a little. Message complete, she let herself be bundled along to the white hospital in a white ambulance, dizzy with all the emotions she couldn't feel. She woke to the faces of her parents and burst into tears. Shoto walked the hospital halls like he was at home in them, which was almost true. After years of visiting his mother weekly, sometimes more, hospitals were no longer the foreignly sterile buildings they had used to be. I'm looking for Achiko Uraraka's room, he told the receptionist. I was told she was in room 4407? The receptionist glanced up, probably to tell him that Uraraka wasn't taking any press interviews, and recognized him as son of the number one. She waved him onwards, a little pale. Uraraka was waiting for him as he walked in. Upright, awake, and relatively calm, she was the picture of understated grace. At least, until she took one look at the massive bouquet of flowers he had brought with him and burst into laughter. As he had intended. Put that down so I can see your face, she demanded, eyeing up the collection of flowers and ridiculously outsized smiley face balloons. He obliged her, settling the bundle on a nearby chair and letting the balloons drift up to the ceiling. Your parents aren't here? He asked. I'm selfishly glad. I hoped I had chosen a time I could talk alone with you. Uraraka's mood swung somber in her eyes, but she still smiled. I finally convinced them to go out and take a break from babying me. I expect they'll be back in a few hours. Shoto nodded, looking around for a place to sit. The only place in the room was the chair with the flowers and a couch full of personal items, so he dumped the flowers at the foot of Uraraka's bed and sat on the chair. Your hand, he said. There was no use beating around the bush. Stain injured it badly. Can you still use your quirk? Uraraka smiled, something drained and bittersweet. You wouldn't believe what quirk specialists they called in to deal with me. Deku would have loved to see all the quirks. Uraraka. Her smile dimmed. It's not as bad as it could be. I can use my quirk, at least. Not so horrible, right? Shoto took her hand, careful of the white patch on her knuckles. Uraraka let him carefully bend each finger without a wince of pain. It's not that, she told him at last. My fingers move. I just don't quite feel them anymore. Here, she took a deep breath. I can't move them quite right, she said all in a rush. Just watch. Her fingers twitched, curled, and then half of them froze halfway through the motion. That's as much as I can get out of them, she said, not quite meeting his eyes. The doctors say it'll get a little better, but not much. The words hung there. Shoto let them hang, methodically sorting through Uraraka's words. It seems to me, he said slowly, that you are working very hard to be okay with all of this. Are you sure you're fine underneath? Her smile wavered and dropped. Shoto, not now. She took a few deep breaths and blinked hard. I have to be okay for my parents. They're so worried and guilty that Stain targeted me because of them. Another deep breath. I'll work through all of this later, I promise. But I need to be all right now. That he could understand crystal clear. Okay, he said, gently squeezing her hand before letting go. Tell me if you ever want to talk. It's not the same, but he touched his scar. I know something of lifetime injuries. Thanks, Uraraka said, almost inaudible, before brightening forcibly. But look, I can still use my quirk. She wiggled down the bed to reach Shoto's flowers. With a touch and a nudge, flowers were sent spinning everywhere, drifting across the room in a silent, chaotic display. It's beautiful, he said, taking a moment to marvel at the scene before plucking a rose from the air. Here. She took it gingerly, avoiding the thorns. Thank you. It's not nearly as beautiful as you, he said sincerely, before realizing what the words and flower implied he thought of her. Well, words were unlikely to fix what they broke. Silence it was. Silence, shattered by Uraraka's genuine laugh. You look so awkward right now, Todoroki-kun. I can't. Oh, that wasn't intended as a confession of love, was it? Since I'll stop laughing at you if it was. No, he grit out, that was not a love confession. You just look radiant, unbroken kind. Nice. Today. And I picked the wrong flower to tell you that. Here. Grabbing at random, he shoved 4 or 5 flowers at her face. You will never stop being awkward, will you? Uraraka laughed. Thank you, Todoroki, really. The flowers are beautiful, right? He said, and floundered for a topic change. How was Stain? He asked, then decided he wanted to die. Asking the victim how their assaulter was, very good topic change. Uraraka sighed. His words keep weighing on me. All he could see of me was my working for money. And there's more to me than that, as a person and as a hero. Shoto nodded. He had forced this conversation topic, so the least he could do was not interrupt Uraraka talking about something that clearly bothered her. But I keep thinking, Uraraka went on, that at the end of the day, I really do stay through the horrors of the job in order to help my parents. There's nothing wrong with that, Shoto murmured. Stain was wrong. I know that. Everyone keeps telling me that. She threw a pillow at him, he let it smack him in the chest and decided to shut up. I know there's nothing wrong with it, she continued, but I see all of you so dedicated to a cause, and I just feel off. Like, am I really working to save people? And if I am, how can I do that better than just showing up to work and doing my job? I want to help people, Shoto, not just send them packing once a villain is out of range. I want to be like Deku. He makes people feel safe no matter what. I want that. I want to help people like that. You've had this building for a while, he said slowly, wary of incoming pillows. Haven't you? Ever since I saw Deku help people with such passion, she admitted. But it's gotten worse, lately, with Stain telling everyone that heroes ought to have a purpose above and beyond paychecks, and now her uninjured heart flexed into the sheets. I want to help people, she said, quiet and fragile. I always have. But I don't see how to do that. I show up to work, I do my job, I go home. And I help a lot of people that way. I know that. But I just feel like there's more I could do that I'm not, and I don't know what it is. She slumped into her bed. I'm tired of feeling this way, she said, muffled by blankets. And I'm sorry for unloading all this on you too. I don't mind. Shoto knew the danger of pent-up emotion, and this had been building for years. If he could relieve some of that pressure by listening, he was glad to do so. I wish I was like Deku, Uraraka said into yet another pillow. I wish the government had never taken him. I wish he could still be a hero. And that, Shoto suspected, was the core of the pain. We can help him out, he said, thinking of his plans to pull government pressure off Midoriya's group. Actually listen. He outlined his proposal for government welfare, and how that would remove attention from Midoriya's Yakuza while helping Midoriya all the same. I could always use help. Deku's formed a Yakuza? Uraraka's voice was quiet. He thinks he has to work illegally to get anything done? I can't say he's wrong, Shoto muttered, wishing for a fleeting moment that he could abandon his responsibilities and throw his lot in with Midoriya wholesale. But he should be wrong. Uraraka burst out, launching herself into an upright position. Todoroki, you can't believe that a Yakuza is the only way Midoriya can help people. Unless, her voice dropped. Todoroki, do you think his father forced him into this? Shoto remembered Shinsu's recounting of the man at Kamino Ward, standing equal with Midoriya in the most corrupt part of town. I don't think anyone could make Midoriya do something against his will, do you? Uraraka didn't laugh, but her eyes softened a little. I guess not. But, how did a Yakuza, Todoroki? Why, Shoto shrugged. I guess he saw it as his best option. His best option, Uraraka echoed, something solidifying in her voice. Right? That's going to be my mission to help people above and beyond a paycheck. Do you hear me? I'm going to give Deku better options to help people than Yakuzas. She took a moment to consider her words, then nodded firmly. She turned to Shoto. Are you with me? He didn't think Midoriya's Yakuza was the great evil Uraraka saw it as, but he was completely behind her desire to get Midoriya the help he needed. Midoriya could turn even the slightest advantage into a game-changing strategy, and he was full ready to give Midoriya that advantage. I'm with you. Good. Shoto loitered against the edge of the alley wall, hair dyed yellow, this time in more permanent dye. Uraraka had done something with her jars of makeup that covered his scar and contoured his face into a subtly different shape. Hopefully it was enough. His plan was to follow someone leaving Midoriya's soup kitchen. He knew better than to go back in, but if he followed someone in the know, perhaps he could get information on Midoriya. He expected a rudimentary lookout system for the place, given its semi-illegal status. At first, he saw nothing. Then, he saw the teenagers, young and scrawny and sharp, wandering the streets seemingly randomly, and he knew he found his lookouts. They looked were no threat, physically, not from a 13-year-old, but all they had to do was raise an alarm and the entire soup kitchen would vanish. Clever. Midoriya had endured a semester of UA, and knew how cunning and overlooked teenagers could be. Shoto failed, however, to attend to the 8-year-old hidden in the shadows until it was too late. Her face glowed in the sudden light of her flip phone. Alarm raised. He cursed and bolted into the long alleyway, expecting a trap. He got one. 5 men, spaced across the alleyway, not even bothering to hide. He would be less subtle than. Shoto slid to a stop. "I'm looking for Izuku Midoriya," he said. "Tell him that Shoto Todoroki wants to speak to him." It didn't take a genius to realize Midoriya had an extensive network in place. If he could pass a message through that network? "Todoroki," one of the men growled. "We want nothing to do with heroes." The last word was spat out, a curse, a warning. Well aware how fragile Uraraka's disguise was, he took a step back. Message delivered. It was time to leave. "Why do you want to see Midoriya?" one of the men asked as Shoto backstepped. The tension in the alleyway immediately coiled. Shoto took a moment to think about his answer. He had to get this right. "I want to help," he said at last, honestly. "I know what abusive heroes are like," he added with a bitter twist. That was all he had to say, and one could cut through the tension in the air with a chainsaw, so, time to leave. He turned and left, ears on high alert for movement from behind. Nothing came. "And you haven't had any contact with Midoriya since the stain incident?" Shoto pressed Shinso. "No," Shinso said through gritted teeth. "Like I told you 2 hours ago. You seem to think I'm in constant contact with him. I'm not. He's an underground Yakuza, and I'm an underground hero. What do you think? It's in our best interests to avoid each other when possible. Like you should be doing," he added pointedly. Despite his words, Shinsu's eyes were pained. He didn't like his legal relationship with Midoriya any better than Shoto did. "I need to talk to him," Shoto muttered. "Why?" Shinso raked his hand through his hair. Shoto didn't have a good answer to that. Maybe he wanted to join Midoriya's Yakuza. Maybe he wanted to throw his effort in with Uraraka and try to get Midoriya back onto the legal side of the law. Maybe he just wanted to see Midoriya again, see that he was safe and well. "Oh, now you don't deign to answer," Shinso muttered. "You're a hero. He's technically a villain. The last thing he needs is attention from the number 4 hero, so leave him alone." Midoriya hadn't left him alone to suffer back in the first-year sports festival. Shoto wasn't going to leave Midoriya alone to suffer now. "I told Uraraka about Midoriya," he said in place of an answer. "She wants to make the government legalize Midoriya?" Shinsu's laugh was sharp and bitter. "She's delusional. You know how the government treats dangerous quirk users. Midoriya's quirk isn't strong unless he harms himself with it," Shoto bit out. "The only danger is he's clever enough to use it well." Shinsu froze. "You're right," Shinso muttered. Shoto jerked alert. "What aren't you saying?" "Classified information. I'm number 4. And I'm underground, and only heard it through Aizawa. It's better if you don't know everything, Todoroki." "What about Midoriya's quirk?" Shoto snarled. "Nothing I'm willing to tell you if you don't know," Shinso said, turning his back on Shoto. "Find it out yourself, if you're so desperate." "I will," Shoto promised, striding out the door before he lost his temper. He was still seething from Shinsu's blatant stonewalling by the time he was halfway home. Really, it was the pile-up of everything. Shinso, Midoriya, his failed attempt at wringing a lead out of the soup kitchen. The hair dye would take at least a week to wash out, and that was somehow the final straw. He kept his hands clenched, grimly hanging onto a little pebble of ice to remind himself to cool down. "Hi," someone said, tapping his shoulder, and he closed his eyes to rein in his flare of temper at being touched. Turned. Midoriya grinned back, quiet and shy, and dragged Shoto into the nearest alleyway. Next time you want to contact me, try not to scare the living daylights out of my entire soup kitchen, Midoriya was saying, almost rambling, as they plunged deeper into the streets. Here, there were people bundled against the cold of late autumn, and Midoriya exchanged nods with them as he passed. The people watched Shoto, wary and half-threatening, in return. Finally, Midoriya tugged him into a run-down building with a table, 2 chairs, and precious little else, including heating. You live like this? Shoto murmured, watching Midoriya for a reaction. Midoriya closed his eyes. I wish. No, I live with father. I only help out here. Father. The word, said almost casually, cut deep. And how did you convince him? Shoto shot back. What price did you pay to help people? Midoriya went blank. Not soulless blank, but carefully blank, as if he didn't know how to respond and didn't want to give anything away. The blankness eased, marginally, but now Shoto could see it for what it was, a mask that Midoriya was refusing to take off. Shoto knew about masks. He had hidden behind a cold, indifferent one for most of his early adolescence. It was Midoriya himself who snapped him out of it. Midoriya, he repeated, cautious, urgent. What price did you pay? You don't have to hide it from me, he added almost plaintively. Midoriya blinked, a sliver of the mask slipping. To reveal pain, hesitation. The mask slid back on. Shoto felt like he had been punched in the stomach. I'm used to hiding, Midoriya murmured. It feels like all I've done is hide, these past 3 years. Forgive me, he continued, words lapsing formal. I cannot pull my mask off right now. His voice warmed, hesitated. But I am glad to see you, Shoto. Me too, Shoto murmured through crushing rejection. His therapist said he was sensitive to rejection after a childhood kept separate from others. That didn't mean it hurt any less. Midoriya's voice wavered toward tears. It didn't get there, but it fought Midoriya as he reined the tears in. Listen. Shoto. I'm so sorry this is hurting you. This isn't how I wanted this to go. Help, Shoto interrupted, scrubbing the pain out of his voice. Midoriya, I came to help you, not to make you comfort me. How can I help? Midoriya shook his head. No, Shoto, you're number 4, you can't. After the government kidnapped you, Shoto interrupted again, they came asking questions about you. He swallowed hard. It came out that, they knew about Endeavor training me all along. Midoriya nodded, silent. I wanted to quit, Shoto said. Throw it in their faces. But I didn't. Because I realized that being a hero would give me the influence necessary to prevent what happened to you and me from happening again. He leaned forward. Midoriya, I'm a hero because I want to help people. Let me help you. Something softened in Midoriya's face. Okay, Midoriya said, tasting the word like it was foreign to him. Okay. He offered a hand. Let me show you what I've been doing. So this is the main base of operations, Midoriya said after several minutes of walking, sweeping a hand across a patch of land hidden by more tangled alleyways than Shoto could count. Shoto overlooked the clearing of buildings with a nasty twist to his stomach. He spent his days fighting villains through the high-rise, high-priced part of town. This, Midoriya's grounds, were another world, filthy, dark, and despairing. We've made major progress to this part of town, Midoriya murmured. It used to be full of rubble, but we cleared it out. The buildings are pretty good at blocking the wind, which is important with winter coming on. It might not look like much, but it's home. At least Midoriya called this, here, home instead of naming his home with the man from Kamino Ward. Still, it stung that such a rundown clearing could be anyone's home, let alone Midoriya's. Midoriya shuffled forward. Mind your step, the ground here is kind of unstable. Cementos could stabilize the ground in minutes, and had it been any other situation, Shoto would have called in favors to get Cementos's help as soon as possible. That people would willingly live like this, that there weren't better alternatives. Shoto bit his tongue and shuffled after Midoriya, rocks shifting underfoot. The first person they came across was a woman slumped against the side of a brick building. Midoriya knelt, and Shoto followed suit. Hey, Midoriya said, gentle a way Shoto hadn't heard before. I have a hand warmer. Would you like it? The woman took the pack mutely, eyes flicking to Shoto. Midoriya nodded, taking the lack of response calmly, and moved on. Shoto followed. This became a pattern. For 20 minutes, Shoto followed as Midoriya handed out hand warmers that shoved off the icy bite of autumn. Some people were grateful, some silent, some indifferent, some borderline hostile. Midoriya helped them all. The next person was different. Midoriya offered a hand warmer, which was summarily ignored. Instead, the man's eyes focused, locked on Shoto. Spirit, he said. Why is Endeavor's son with you? He's safe, Midoriya said hurriedly. Maki, this is Shoto. He's helping me today. A word with Todoroki, Maki said. If you don't mind, Spirit. Midoriya glanced at Shoto, who nodded. Of course, Midoriya said, standing. Shoto, I'll be just across the street, in the abandoned ramen shop. Okay. Midoriya left. In the space between breaths, Maki was in Shoto's face, looming. Shoto stared back, unblinking. I don't know what you did to earn Spirit's trust, Maki said slowly, tasting the words. But know you are up against people who will pound your skull in if you think of betraying him. Truly, a Yakuza, Shoto thought with a slight shudder. Did Midoriya know the lengths of loyalty he had earned? Shoto doubted it. I understand, said Shoto, still unblinking. Good. The man stayed there, standing silently, and Shoto decided this conversation was probably done. He turned and followed Midoriya into the ramen shop. He felt Maki's eyes on his back the entire walk across the street. You have very loyal followers, Shoto told Midoriya, sliding the door open. There was someone in the shadows behind Midoriya, but he couldn't make out any precise features. Midoriya nodded, fluffy hair bobbing with emotion. It wasn't precisely the look of a Yakuza leader, but there you had it. Midoriya was no traditional Yakuza. Did Maki give you trouble? I'm afraid you'll find a lot of people on their guard around you. The words were straightforward, gentle but unapologetic. Good to see you again, the shadow said, and he recognized the voice. It was the woman who nearly recruited him from the streets. She stepped out of the shadows. At least, Spirit says it's good to see you, and I trust him. She eyed Shoto speculatively, and the message was clear. I trust him more than I trust you. Shoto ignored the pleasantry. Midoriya, how can I help you? I told you I'm going to help you, and I mean it. Midoriya stilled. Shoto, you can't throw your career away like that. Think of all the people you could help as a hero. Think of all the people I can help here. Clearly they need it. Otherwise, you would have focused on a different group of people. I'm not letting you throw your career away. And I, Shoto snapped, taking an aborted step forward, am not letting you live alone with your father without support. He steadied his voice. Let me help you, Midoriya. The woman watched the exchange with muted interest, eyes flicking between the two of them. Midoriya perched on a bar stool. Shoto, this isn't a life for you. He had forgotten how stubbornly self-sacrificial Midoriya could be. This isn't a life for you either, Shoto bit out. Look me in the eyes and tell me you wouldn't rather avoid being chased by the government at every step. The government made their decision, Midoriya said. Now, I'm making mine. I choose to help people, and I'm not stepping away from that. I didn't mean that, I meant, Shoto broke off. I just want to help you, okay? Tell me how and I'll do it. You're not throwing away your career over this, Midoriya emphasized, holding up a hand as Shoto began to furiously protest. Shoto, I can be at peace doing what I'm doing partly because I know you guys are out there, helping the people I can't. If you truly want to help, don't take that away from me. That was harder to argue against. Midoriya's silver tongue had grown clever, it seemed. You really trust him, Spirit? The woman again. Midoriya nodded, eyes fierce. I do. Then set him on government policy. You've been complaining about that for too long. Here's your opportunity to get the number 4 involved. Midoriya slid off the seat. If he had been any younger, Shoto suspected he would be vibrating with suppressed excitement. As was, Midoriya's eyes slid into calculating wonder. If you're right. Shoto, how do you feel about government policy? It's stupid, Shoto said promptly. I was already going to propose government policies that better support the homeless as a way to help you and pull attention off your group. Midoriya's posture solidified into something certain. I can tell you all the ways the system is broken. I've seen it firsthand. If you could do anything about the state of quirk discrimination. Shoto startled. Quirk discrimination? Midoriya's eyes hardened. Yeah. It's really bad. More than a quarter of the people on the streets are there because they are denied work and housing due to their dangerous quirk, and almost 20% of the people on the streets are quirkless. That was bad. Shoto knew that much. Tell me about the quirkless, he pressed. I don't know hardly anything about them. Something passed across Midoriya's face. Shoto recognized the look. It was a sign of an incoming, passionate info dump. That's because the quirkless are highly underrepresented in media, politics, workplaces, and practically everywhere else. The places they're overrepresented are suicide rates and homelessness. Midoriya paused to draw breath. People like to pretend the quirkless don't exist, and that's easy when there's so few of them. The official quirklessness rate is 20%, right? Right? Shoto said, reeling at the onslaught of information. But it's really lower, right? Midoriya nodded sharply. Right? Quirklessness was at 20% 2 generations ago. Last generation, it was at 7%, and our generation, it's at 2%. For the children being born right now, it's less than 0.5%. 2%. And you said 20% of the homeless are quirkless? Right? And the rate of people without a quirk is about 7.5% when you average all the generations together. So the rates of quirkless on the streets almost triple what it is in the general population, Shoto said slowly. Why isn't anyone doing anything if the numbers are out there? No one cares, Midoriya said, blunt and pained. Almost no one cares about the quirkless, and almost no one cares about the people whose quirks seem too frightening to be around. That's how at least half the people end up on the streets. Shoto, if you really want to help, then do something about this. That was a huge task. Shoto had intended to throw his lot in with Midoriya, not change the fabric of society. But if Midoriya asked it of him, he would try. I'd start with the subcommittees in law reform, Midoriya suggested. There's some people there who want to see change, they just don't have power enough to do anything. The backing of the number 4 hero will go farther than you expect. Think about how much All Might changed society as a hero. You can do the same thing. To be compared to All Might was a heavy burden. Shoto knew, intimately, how hard his father worked to be number 1, and endeavor didn't even come close to All Might. The bruised child within him was secretly glad of this fact. But Midoriya believed in him. Midoriya, who was so full of passion for not only quirks but for helping the quirkless and abused. Which reminded him. Shinso said something happened with your quirk, Shinso said slowly. He wouldn't tell me more than that. The woman drew a sharp breath. Midoriya flinched. Well, I guess we know the government knows now, he muttered. I'm surprised they didn't send out more patrols to look for me. Shinso remembered Shinsu's tense posture, his reluctance to share anything about Midoriya, his insider knowledge of Midoriya's case. I think they set the underground heroes on you, he said. Midoriya, what about your quirk? Midoriya wouldn't meet his eyes. I think you should tell him, the woman said out of the blue. Midoriya watched her, wary and tired. The woman sighed. Look, it's obvious your quirk weighs on you. If you won't tell me, tell him. Tell someone. Tell anyone. You need to get it off your chest? Midoriya flinched. The words hung in the air, heavy with invitation. Okay, Midoriya said, fragile. Kaori, could you? On it? The woman shoved herself upright and walked out the door, sparing only a glance behind her to fix Shoto with a look that warned him of the trust Midoriya was placing in him. She doesn't quite trust you, Midoriya said. I guess you've noticed there's a lot of people like that here, since it's hard to trust a system that… Midoriya stopped. You're stalling, Shoto said. Stop that? Do you really think I wouldn't understand hating part of your quirk? Hate was a guess at why Midoriya avoided the subject so fixedly. It was a good guess from Midoriya's flinch. Midoriya opened his mouth, closed it, fiddled with his hands, sat back down. No, he said, more to himself than to Shoto. You'd understand? Shoto kept quiet. It wasn't wise to interrupt someone psyching themselves up for a confession. My quirk, Midoriya stumbled out. Shoto, you'll keep this secret, right? Of course. The government already knew, it seemed, but the reassurance settled Midoriya somewhat. Midoriya breathed in. My father's quirk, he said, slow and careful, is the power to take and give other people's quirks. He paused a beat. Shoto's mind whirled with the new information. This explained the terrifying amount of quirks the man at Kamino wielded. This explained the man's ranking as an S+ villain. This explained the government's reflexive fear of Midoriya because, stomach dropping, Shoto realized where this was headed a moment before it happened. Midoriya looked away. I inherited my father's quirk. I didn't know that until 3 years ago, Midoriya said. It's a long story I'd rather not share. You, Shoto said carefully, must be ranked an S+ villain then. Midoriya shuddered, twisted his fingers together. Yeah. How did you not know that? They locked your case, Shoto said bitterly. Anyone from 1A, except Shinso, doesn't get access to the police investigation on you. We're too biased. His words dripped contempt. No wonder they're careful with your information, if they think you'll go the way of your father. He considered his words, Midoriya's stiff, shamed posture, Midoriya's lack of eye contact. Good on you for shoving it in their faces with a soup kitchen, he added, near cheerful. This startled an almost laugh out of Midoriya. Mission accomplished. So you can take and give quirks? Shoto said, trying to pump acceptance into every word. This quirk was frightening. That didn't mean Midoriya was frightening, though, and Shoto would go to his grave proclaiming that. But, can you show me? Midoriya's eyes snapped to him, half startled, half afraid. I think I remember someone telling me, Shoto said, deliberately slow, that my quirk was my power. Not my father's. Midoriya's mask fluctuated, wavered, and dissolved into furious tears. This lasted some time. Shoto vividly remembered the gut punch the words had been at the sports festival. Did Midoriya want comfort? Privacy? Shoto had no idea, so he sat there, awkwardly stiff, and waited out the tears. Midoriya dried out at length, sniffling. It's not fair to use my words against me, he said, but already his voice was shades happier. You wanted to see? Shoto nodded, wordless. Midoriya lit up. Literally. It was a slow thing, skin brightening from dull to glowing to radiant by degrees. By the end, Shoto felt like he was staring into the depths of a supernova, all swirling glory. Midoriya let it go almost shyly, light flickering out like a candle. Shoto blinked to readjust. And blinked again, after images staining his eyes white. Midoriya was crying again. This time, the tears were slow and silent, and glowed ever so slightly. It suits you, Shoto said quietly. The quirk, now was not the time to ask who and how and why. Now was the time for kind honesty. Thanks, Midoriya whispered, voice muffled through the arm scrubbing at his face. Then quieter yet, I like this quirk, Shoto. Me too, Shoto murmured, and let his words drop away into silence. They stayed like that a while. Midoriya scooted closer to Shoto. Shoto shifted his weight toward Midoriya. Outside, the autumn wind tugged at the building, sending creaks through the room. Shoto shivered, the building lacked heating, and sitting still wasn't a favorable position. He'd set himself on fire, just a bit, but the whole room was dry wood and he wasn't going to risk stray sparks. Midoriya let out a breathy little laugh and tossed him a hand warmer. It's left over, he said. I had that one ready from before. Shoto curled his hands around the packet, basking in the glow that sent warm shudders down his body. Just like Midoriya, he thought. Quiet, glowing warmth. What other quirks do you have? He asked cautiously. Midoriya wrapped his arms around himself. Plus, mostly physical mutations, but I've got some healing, damage, and enhancement quirks, too. His voice cut off at the end of the sentence, subtly tense, and Shoto didn't press. Okay, Shoto said, trying to shape his question, already knowing the answer. Do you want to talk about it more? Midoriya's face attempted a mask before giving up halfway through. Not really. No. Okay. More silence. But S+, Shoto burst out. That's All Might level. What do they think a glow quirk is going to do? He realized, too late, that this was back on the topic Midoriya just said he wanted to avoid. Midoriya wordlessly extended a hand, arms straightening at the elbow to point at the wall. There was a rush of air and bang. Shoto looked at where the wall used to be. Shards of wood flecked off the gaping hole. Outside there were shouts. Midoriya paused, then his forehead broke apart. Out squirmed a horn, small and off-center. Shoto blinked. And the wall wove itself back together, an explosion in reverse. Wood arced back into position, support beams re-knitted themselves, flaking paint reapplied itself. Shoto glanced at Midoriya. The horn was gone. I recognize the air blast from Kamino, he said slowly, dreading the implications, but the horn quirk is new. Asterisk, did you take someone's quirk away? Asterisk, he didn't dare ask. Midoriya heard the question anyways, because of course he did. Muted pride, flashed across his face. That's maybe the one good thing that's come from this quirk, he said, shifting into a more upright position. There was this little girl. A Yakuza was abusing her for her quirk. They were killing her over and over. Shoto? That hit far too close to home. Shoto gagged with fleeting memories of training until his throat was raw from throwing up. Today, I'm not comfortable with this quirk. But Eri showed me I can use it for good. Father told me this Yakuza was making quirk-canceling bullets. So we stopped them. Shoto let the word pass, since otherwise his brain was going to paralyze itself. Well, Father stopped them. I was mostly there for Eri. The words hung in the air. What next? Shoto croaked. She hated herself, Midoriya whispered. She had been told she was a curse because of her quirk. Nothing I said convinced her. There was real pain in his voice. So I offered to take it away. Oh, Shoto murmured, then paused as an idea hit him. Why didn't your father take it? It rewinds time. That's a powerful quirk. He'd want it, I'd expect. He did, Midoriya murmured. He's borrowed it a few times. Why doesn't he always keep it? Shoto pressed. The ice in his guts told him this was important. Midoriya's face went blank again. Because we made a deal. Oh no. Tell me the deal, Midoriya. No, and that was the end of that, Shoto knew, from tone of voice alone. He could scream. Instead, he stood and traced the perfectly unbroken wall, wood splintering under his fingers. By the time he finished, he had his temper back under control. The soup kitchen, Midoriya said, clearly grasping for a change in subject. You asked about it? Shoto nodded. He would allow the change in conversation. For now. It's not just the soup kitchen. Shoto nodded again. By now, that much was clear. Midoriya had an information network, a fast one that told him about Shoto's disastrous encounter with the soup kitchen within the hour. It's a full system, Midoriya confessed. Self-defense lessons, a cooperative network between gangs, a food system, an alert system for avoiding being in the crossfire of villain fights. This place here is a safe ground. Police don't know about it, and villains know to stay away. We just started quirk control lessons, since most quirked people on the streets don't really know how to handle their quirk. The words were calm and confident. What followed, less so. I really hate using the word Yakuza, Midoriya said, slow and reluctant, but I get why the police see us that way. Shoto snorted. No offense, Midoriya, but you're definitely leading a Yakuza. He ticked off the points on his fingers. You have an information network, you have a self-run organization that wants nothing to do with the government, you're encouraging people to use their quirks, and you're completely under the radar of the law. Midoriya bit his lip. When you say it like that, I'm saying the truth, Shoto finished. Look, it's not a bad thing. I'd join you if you'd let me. Midoriya's face quite clearly said that no, he would not be letting Shoto join him. Formally at least. Shoto took a deep breath. All I'm saying is that you are more than technically running a criminal organization. Midoriya nodded, flinched. So what you need, Shoto stressed, is someone distracting the government from you. How do I start? It sounds like you have some ideas already, Midoriya mumbled. Start there. I don't know. He paused. We've been really lucky the government has ignored what looks like a soup kitchen on paper. Shoto, I don't know how much longer I can keep up running this and running from the government, not when you said the underground heroes are looking for me. That's why I'm here, Shoto repeated. Where will the government find you first? The soup kitchen, Midoriya said, a little more firmly. It doesn't pass safety regulations, but no one from the government has bothered to check us out yet. I'll work on it, Shoto promised. He glanced outside. It was getting dark. Pulling out his phone, he checked the time and cursed. I have patrol in half an hour. I've got to go. Midoriya stood, and his mask slid back on. I'll walk you out. Don't take this as an excuse to disappear on me again, Shoto warned. I expect to stay in contact with you. I disappear on everyone, Midoriya said. That's the point. But I'll try to keep in contact. You'd better. I will. They left, past broken buildings and dark shadows of people lining the walls, the gathering more crowded now than a few hours ago. Shoto stepped carefully past the shifting rocks underfoot and turned. Midoriya was glowing slightly, now, his freckles little points of light in the darkness. Be safe, Shoto said, a plea. You too. Shoto nodded. Good night. It ached to leave Midoriya in the shadows, but he would do it for Midoriya's sake. He turned once, to the sight of two silhouettes in the darkness. Shoto's heart, footsteps hesitated. Hung motionless. Continued. Midoriya had made it 3 years. He had to trust Midoriya, now. He tugged out his phone once out of earshot. That was important because All Might picked up. Todoroki? The man sounded tired. It was late, Shoto realized. Late enough for a retired old man to be in bed. A flash of guilt. I need your help, he said. What politicians do you know that I can work with on law reform? You want political connections? Toshinori echoed, sinking into the nearest chair. Young Uraraka was asking me that just yesterday. She was quick, Todoroki murmured, then fired off questions about navigating the political court before Toshinori could do more than file Todoroki's response away. They were good questions. As son of the number one, Todoroki was more familiar with politics than most. You have the right hero persona for politics, Toshinori murmured, suppressing a body-heaving cough and swallowing about a pint of blood. As All Might, I was too loud and blunt for the political scene. But you'll do better. Better than you? A trace of disbelief wound through young Todoroki's voice. You wrote national history for 30 years. Yes. Toshinori sighed and cleared his throat. Ahem. By being a force for change. A hero who always wore a smile and laughed at danger. An inspiration, an idol. He let his voice drop back into its normal register. The fool. The change I made was a stopgap. It wasn't sustainable. Do better than me, young Todoroki. The line went quiet. As a child in the age of All Might, Todoroki was probably struggling to hear All Might himself brutally dissect that era. Still, it was the truth. Toshinori would never regret helping people, but he knew now that his most lasting work was guiding the next generation of heroes along, a generation that relied on teamwork instead of a solitary pillar. A generation that was taking an unprecedented interest in politics, if Todoroki and Uraraka were any indication. Todoroki was saying something. Toshinori cleared his throat. Forgive me, I was lost in thought. Say that again, my boy. I'm focusing on legal reform for the homeless. What people can I talk to? That was unexpected. Todoroki, sheltered by wealth, had never been exposed to most poor people. Toshinori hummed. I know some people aiming to improve overall quality of life. I don't know if they have anything specifically on the homeless. It's a start, Todoroki said. I'll take it. Would you put me in contact with this group? So eager to begin. If you don't mind a personal question, he said, thinking over the wording, what made you advocate for the homeless? Todoroki paused some more, and let the silence drag out. Toshinori knew this quality of silence. What makes you hesitate to share? He pressed gently. Static snapped over the phone as Todoroki exhaled. It's complicated. Another pause. There is information I want you to know, but I don't know if it's my place to say. A third party. That complicated matters. Toshinori waited. I want you to know, Todoroki said slowly. I think it would ease your mind to know. All Might was loud. All Might was in your face. Few realized that Toshinori knew the craft of silence well. He used that to his advantage now, drawing out Todoroki's words with just a touch more assuring, inviting lack of words. I think you two should talk, Todoroki said, starting slow, gaining momentum as he went. Let me work on that. Can you give me the contact information of the politicians you mentioned in the meantime? To say Toshinori was interested would be an understatement. All sorts wanted to meet All Might, even a retired All Might. But for Todoroki to single his contact out, they were something special. I look forward to hearing from your contact, he said. I believe the leader of the Quality of Life movement is named Aichi Kobayashi. I'll put you two in email contact. Thanks, Todoroki said, then hung up with his usual abruptness. Toshinori padded heavily over to his computer, where an email to Inko Midoriya lay half-written. He had made a point to keep in contact with her. First and foremost, he wanted her to feel she wasn't alone, stripped of sun and country and peace of mind about her husband. Second, looking to the future, he wanted her to know she had All Might as a contact should she run into legal trouble from any of the many governments that had taken sudden interest in the wife of All for One. Her correspondences back were stilted and brief, but warm. Forgive me for not writing more personally, she had said, but you can guess who is monitoring my email, and he doesn't like you. Your kindness, however, is greatly appreciated. Even now, Inko Midoriya held herself with dignity. Toshinori respected that greatly. Now he was taking a risk. A dangerous risk, an aching need. He had drafted several paragraphs worth of text before Todoroki's call, but now he deleted them all. They were too roundabout, and it wasn't as if All for One would miss the message if it was flanked by a few extra paragraphs. Have you had contact with your son? He wrote in shaking hands. I am not asking for information on him. I just want to know if he's safe. He had drafted versions of this email many, many times over the past 2.5 years, but only now did he dare to send it. Now, when Naomasa reported round 2 of the face-off between Stain and a green-haired young man. All for One had Izuku on a leash, but the leash was slack enough that retaliation wouldn't choke Izuku. He hesitated. Was he really sending this email? Did he dare? For Izuku, yes. He hit send. Todoroki called again that afternoon. Toshinori had been on pins and needles ever since the email sent, refreshing his email every 3rd minute. All for One could have seen the email and deleted it, or seen it and retaliated, or... Todoroki, he said, years of practice hiding his panic behind a mild, warm voice. How can I help you? Your politicians move quickly, Todoroki said. I thought politics moved slowly, but I was wrong. Most people will make time for a top 10 hero, All Might said with no small amount of bitterness. He had escalated this problem in his time as the symbol of peace, and it haunted him at night. Heroism is the new social ranking, and you rank highly. He moderated his tone for Todoroki's sake. He was angry at the system, not at the young man, but Todoroki might take it otherwise. It didn't help that today, he was particularly worried about his boy, his successor, his enemy's son. Nothing about Midoriya's position was easy or kind, and Toshinori wished he could hold his boy until all their problems melted away. With All for One in the picture, that wasn't happening anytime soon. For you. His mind had drifted away again. It was doing that more often, and the amount of blood Toshinori coughed up was escalating. It painted a sharp picture of Toshinori's next few years, in whatever amount was left to him. Honestly, he survived for Midoriya's sake these days. He had since Kamino. Might? All Might, are you there? I'm here, Toshinori said, lowering himself onto his bed. Forgive me. My focus is not what I would like it to be. That's all right, Todoroki said, voice gentle. He thought Toshinori was losing touch with reality. Well, not quite yet. I want you to call this number, Todoroki said, slowly reciting a chain of numbers and then repeating it. It will help you, I think. Toshinori peeled a sticky note from off the pad on his bedside table and wrote down the number. Is this right? He asked, repeating back the number. A 3, not a 2, but otherwise yes, Todoroki said. I have to go, but tell me how the call goes. Toshinori's email loaded, refreshed. A new email alert dinged. Toshinori dropped the phone. Clicked the email with trembling hands. "Congratulations on not dying of shame as I had hoped," read the cold, clear words. "Izuku is safe. Leave my family alone, Toshinori Yagi." The email was unsigned. Izuku. That was all that registered over his thumping heart for several minutes. Izuku, safe, from the mouth of one who had every reason to taunt Toshinori with One for All's lack of safety. Then he realized he might track All for One and Izuku from this email. A small change, a slim chance, but maybe. Involving the police in this would only end in tragedy, and Toshinori had better hacking skills than most people attributed to his large, loud persona. He had run into too many cases of a ticking bomb, a risky venture into an underground database, and unsecured communication between villains to not have at least an honorary college degree in hacking. So, it appeared, did All for One. The moment Toshinori tried to access the send location of the email, his computer downloaded about 50 different viruses that would no doubt destroy his computer. There were precedents in place for this. All Might's computerized enough classified information on it to be a matter of national security, so the moment a virus tried to broadcast information to an outside source, the computer would wipe itself. Almost on cue, his computer flickered and a message popped up informing him his computer would wipe in 5, 4, 3, and he knew that any attempt to meddle with the wipe would trigger a tiny bomb in the computer that would decimate the hard drive and do a number on anyone nearby. He had pictures of Izuku on this computer. Pictures of his boy laughing, of his boy straining to pull a refrigerator on the beach, of his boy vibrating with information almost too fast for the camera to capture a steady image. He had all the pictures backed up on 5 different hard drives, but the loss still ached. The phone rang. Only then did Toshinori register that he had dropped the phone on Todoroki without a word. He picked up the phone. Hit accept call. "Are you all right?" Todoroki said, a thread of steel caution in his words. All Might, unresponsive on the phone. Toshinori acknowledged there were a few different ways that could end badly. "Yes," he rasped. "I'm fine." "You're lying," Todoroki said with all the blunt force of a speeding train. "What happened?" "It's private," Toshinori said quietly, since if All for One's email wasn't private, then it was going to be a matter of national concern. "Enough, Todoroki." "If you insist," Todoroki said coolly, then hung up. Toshinori sat there a while, staring at the phone, processing. Sometime he fell asleep. He woke up slowly as coughs speared their way out of his lungs. His health was getting worse, he knew, but this was getting unreasonably hard to breathe. Breathe in. Cough, cough, cough. He spat out a huge bulk of clotted blood, and his breathing eased significantly. He just sat there holding the dripping mass. He stood to throw away the mess and wash his hands. His hands were shaking, he registered. From nightmares? From old age? Toshinori sank back in his worn chair. Politics. All for One. Izuku. It all lay in a court far above where he could function, these days. It stung that Izuku should be trapped so far above the courts of normal life. Who even knew what his boy was doing these days? Was he a forced villain? A scared child? A prisoner trapped with a tyrant of a father? He shifted his weight, and something crinkled under him. He shifted further to uncover a scrap of paper with a number scribbled onto it. Todoroki's number. He had forgotten it. He considered the piece of paper for long moments, deciding whether it was worth it to call when his attention was so strained with worry. Normally he would say no, but he quite needed a distraction, and talking to some fan or another might remind him of the good he had done in his time. He dialed in the number and hit call. Ring. Todoroki's mystery person picked up on the second ring. Spirit speaking. "Who are you, and what's the problem?" Toshinori considered that he might have misdialed the number. He checked the scrap of paper, but no, he had dialed 3 instead of 2, just as Todoroki had instructed. "Hello?" The voice on the other end of the phone said, gentling. "Are you in a position to speak? I can get people to trace your location from this call if you're in danger." "There's no danger," Toshinori said, wondering why Todoroki would send him to a distress hotline. "Who is this?" There was a sharp intake of breath, then a half-strangled sob. "All Might?" Yes, Toshinori said, still wondering at the identity of the caller. If you're busy, I can call another time. I was given this number by by Equilibrium. I was told you would want to speak with me? Another half-sob. He should have told me he would give the number to you. The voice was vaguely familiar, Toshinori decided, rummaging through old memories for a reference. All Might had met dozens of people a day for decades. It was hard. All Might, the speaker said, voice stabilizing. Father is going to be really upset that you called after that email. That email. Time shattered into bits, and Toshinori's heart along with it. Izuku, he whispered. Hi, Izuku whispered back, voice ever so older than when he was taken. Hi, All Might. Reality came crashing down. You'll get in trouble for this call, he murmured. Won't you? Todoroki will, Izuku muttered. I'll work on that. I have more free rein than you might think. I should have called you earlier, to let you know that. All for One wouldn't stand for it, Toshinori bit out, regretting putting Izuku in danger, even for these golden moments alone with Izuku. He won't now. Izuku, I refuse to put you in further danger. Danger, Izuku said, voice echoing with an odd note. I've never been in any danger with father. Some days I wish. It is what it is. Izuku, All Might repeated, heart clenching painfully at the word father. I know you have no regard for your own safety. Believe it or not, I've grown out of that, Izuku said and paused. Then, the words tinny with distance, came the words, no, it's All Might. Another pause. No, I didn't know it was him. The call came from my work phone. Another pause. No, you can't talk to him. You're just going to tell him to go and die again. Father. Beep. A dial tone. Toshinori set the phone down, let out a shaky breath, and wept for his boy. The phone rang. Toshinori regarded it, almost numb from over-emotion. He answered. Greetings, drawled an all-too-familiar voice. It was All for One's voice that Izuku's voice had put Toshinori in mind of. A realization for another day. You are persistent, aren't you, little Yagi? All for One continued, still ice-calm. I did warn you to leave my family alone. From the distance came thudding footsteps, and the half-yell to give my phone back. Izuku says you didn't know where the number led, this time, All for One said, unruffled. And he would be terribly disappointed if your internal organs somehow left your body. Stop harassing All Might, said Izuku from somewhere in the distance, and give my phone back. What if someone actually calls me on it? This is your final warning. Keep away from Izuku, and I'll keep away from the pathetic shell you've become. Otherwise, his voice dripped poisonous promise. I wouldn't call him anyways, Toshinori breathed. Not when you have him under your power. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. I love your son enough to not put him in danger from you. I would never hurt Izuku, All for One said with cold contempt. Not on purpose, and neither out of the incompetence you demonstrated in your short time with him. There was a lingering pause. I'm not turning hero, Izuku's voice said, echoing oddly. Now give my phone back. I want to ask him about law reform. The line went dead. Toshinori stared at the phone, numb, until it rang in his hand again. He answered, Can't believe he agreed to this, Izuku was muttering. Oh, you answered. Listen, do you know any heroes interested in law reform? Todoroki. Uraraka. The words lay there on the tip of his tongue. Because I've been working on helping the homeless and could really use some legal support? Todoroki. Uraraka. Now the words burned on his tongue. What did they know? How had Todoroki, at least, got in contact with Izuku enough to shift his career towards politics? You already know about Todoroki and Uraraka, he said, attention thoroughly engrossed. Uraraka? Izuku said, startled. No, I didn't. I follow. A pause over the line. Rustling and footsteps. We agreed, Izuku said from far away again. I couldn't tip the odds in anything hero or villain related. This is politics. All for One said something from too far away to hear. Stain was a vigilante, Izuku answered, passionate. That's different. All Might pressed the phone to his ear, heart thundering in his ears. Izuku's voice took on an edge. All Might's retired because of you, so he's not a hero. And I'm asking him about politics. A long pause. Right? Izuku said, voice close to the microphone again. Politics? Promise me you're safe, Toshinori breathed. Promise, Izuku said promptly. Too promptly? I've got to go soon, I've got a self-defense class that I'm teaching, but call me back and I'll answer. Toshinori's heart ached. Don't go. But he didn't say the words. Izuku was far more than a prisoner. He was as busy as he had ever been, helping the homeless this time around. Call me if you need legal help, he said, since that was all he had left to offer these days. Homeless policy reform, Izuku repeated. Anyone who's interested in that, put them in contact with Todoroki, and he'll keep in contact with me. Over the phone, an alarm went off. That's my cue to go, Izuku said, his voice mask of brisk efficiency dissolving in seconds. All Might, I miss you. The words, half-whispered, wrung Toshinori's heart. I miss you too, my boy, he whispered back. Be safe. Be well. Okay, Izuku said, sounding young, and hung up. Words echoed in his ears. Stay away from my family. I miss you. Homeless law reform. For Izuku's sake, he didn't dare call Izuku unless his boy initiated the call. There was too much danger from all for one, otherwise. Toshinori leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the grief-hope-sorrow overtake him. Patrols meant high alert, which meant a twitch of attention at every passing snowflake and a massive jolt when her ringtone split the air. Only practiced nerves kept Achiko from jumping out of her skin. She checked her phone. Todoroki. Todoroki was not particularly social. She well expected to go months without talking to him, and given they had talked at her hospital bedside just days ago, she wasn't expecting whatever this was. Intrigued, she hit accept call. I'm on patrol right now, she said, ducking into a nearby alleyway. Empty. Is there something you need? I thought I would join you, Todoroki said, voice crackling badly over the poor cell coverage. She had the money to buy a better phone, but couldn't quite bear to, so a bad connection it was. She considered his words. He couldn't be worried about her, could he? She refused to be coddled, not after the stain incident. She flexed her fingers, feeling the new stiffness and limited range of motion. She was better than needing the number 4 to babysit her. It occurred to Achiko that the last Todoroki had seen of her, she had been sitting pale in a hospital bed. It might not be for coddling, but for sheer peace of mind, that he asked to be with her a while. All right, she conceded, and gave the street name she was on. He was there less than 5 minutes later. I was in the area, he explained, falling into step beside her. You usually aren't, she pointed out, eyes scanning back and forth across the street. I meant to find you, he admitted, and then proceeded to completely throw her by changing topics entirely. I was talking to All Might, and he said you were looking into some sort of homeless initiative? She blinked. Yes, she said cautiously. That's... Achiko considered her words, and decided Todoroki was a good enough secret keeper. That's the official story, anyways, she murmured, lowering her voice. I'm really trying to help Deku. She felt the weight of the sideways look he shot her go straight through the side of her head. You know that's a career risk, he murmured back, equally quiet. She could have slapped him. She almost did. Don't talk about him like that. Deku's way more than a career risk. Todoroki's look turned indecipherable. He is, Todoroki agreed. But there are risks. We all agreed to change the government from the inside. You can't do that from prison. It sounded like he was weighing the words, something unknown coloring his words. Someone walked past, footsteps echoing on the pavement. This isn't the place to discuss this, she said, refocusing on the streets around them. Come to my flat afterwards and we'll talk. A half-hour later, Todoroki settled into one of her bare wood chairs, and she spared a moment to be embarrassed that she had invited heroic's royalty into her near-threadbare apartment. Most of her money went to her parents, not that her parents knew that, and she was uncomfortable with extravagance. That didn't mean she didn't wish for it, sometimes. Like now. I'm not going behind anyone's backs to help Deku, she said, fishing around for something from the fridge to serve. Orange juice or milk? Milk, please. She poured a cup and handed it to him. I went to the Hero Commission about Deku, she said, watching the shock in his eyes. I said Deku is a better asset than fugitive to the government. Todoroki sat motionless for a good few seconds before stirring. Do you really think Midoriya wants to be involved with the government that threw him in Tartarus? He asked, slow anger in his voice. Just because you don't forgive doesn't mean Deku won't, she snapped back, and immediately regretted her words. Look, I don't agree with what the government did, but you have to admit, Deku really wants to be a hero. I want to give him a second chance at that, and there's people on the Hero Commission who agree. Todoroki sipped his milk. You've been busy since staying, he said at length. Talking with the Hero Commission and all? Deku deserves a second chance, she said, leaning half across the table in her outrage. Stop being so pessimistic and think it through. Deku's brilliant, he loves heroes, he loves helping people. The Hero Commission is smart, they want the best for everyone, and they see how Deku could help people. It's not that hard. Something wrestled its way across Todoroki's face. Or, alternatively, they see Midoriya as a potential threat, and want to keep him close for observation. You saw what they did last time. Not everyone in politics is evil, she said, standing. Todoroki remained unmoved. No, just enough of them. Just because, she started, then bit back the words in shame. Todoroki had every right to be angry at certain politicians for how they allowed the destruction of his childhood, even if it gave him a warped view of all politicians. Not all of them were bad, and quite a few were wanting change. If she could just help him see that, it probably wouldn't happen in just one night, she admitted to herself. There are good people trying their best, among everyone else, she said, settling carefully on the words. I'm working with people like that. Todoroki looked at her face and apparently admitted defeat. If you say so, he said wearily. Just don't put Midoriya in a position where he's forced into anything. Let him make his own choices. Of course, she said, startled and appalled. What do you take me for? Todoroki's forehead creased, and his face gentled, and he opened his mouth to speak. Dread creeping up her lungs. Darkness. Achiko gasped for air, risking a glance at Todoroki. He sat, grim and unmoving. He had been expecting this, somehow. Someone, stepped out of the shadows. Shoto Todoroki, said a voice. It was a calm voice, one that didn't bother with projecting fear because it knew its listener would feel it anyways. Achiko slid a hand toward the gun at her hip. A cold hand grabbed her. It was Todoroki, eyes flashing near desperate warning. Slowly, she eased her hands back into view. The voice watched her, silently sarcastic. You think a gun can stop me? Instincts told her that no, guns wouldn't do much to stop this presence. She swallowed, mentally readied her hands. Breathe in. Breathe out. This was no time to lose her cool. You dare interfere with the affairs of my son, the man murmured. Todoroki tipped his head up, for a moment the cold, remote presence he had been when they first met. Yes. If you love him, then allow him to talk to his friends. I allowed it, the voice said, getting closer as shadows loomed. I allowed him you, and you broke that trust? I put him in contact with another friend, Todoroki said, still remote. All might is your enemy, not his. Something screamed, ripped, slashed through her mind, something near physical in its presence. Something huge. Something ancient. Something cruel. Achiko swallowed. Moving might be her death, but she thought she might die here, anyways. Better to die moving than still. She lunged, hands outstretched. She flung herself through shadows, through evil, to some human core. If she could only touch him. A vice grip around both wrists ground bone against bone. She bit back a scream. Saw nothing. Felt everything. A brave little hero, the voice murmured, right into her ear. She kicked blindly. Hit the wall. Izuku would be so disappointed if you died, after all the effort he undertook saving you, the voice continued, unaffected. Don't give me reason to kill. It occurred to her, then, who was holding her. Her muscles went weak. The vice grip let go of her wrists and forced her away, into the light. She fell to her knees, then full flat on the ground, and took a moment before stumbling back up. Todoroki was there, then, dragging her away, face pale. I think I know the appropriate punishment, little Todoroki, all for one went on, voice dripping dark satisfaction. Hero work from you is suspended indefinitely unless you want direct action from me. Since you insist on politics, you will focus your time on legislature that will help my son. The pause. And you, Uravity, he said, sarcastic in his slowness. I can hardly fault you for your little attack, but I hear you have taken interest in politics as well. She swallowed, throat dry. Yes. She could still feel phantom hands around her wrists. See that your actions meet my standards, All for One said. See that you take care of Izuku, Todoroki said, voice soft. Something in the air, softened? Gentled? Those must be the wrong words, Achiko thought half hysterically. He is safer with me than with you, little heroes. Then there was absence. No dramatic exit, no nothing, just the absence of darkness. Sorry to involve you in that, Todoroki said, slumping in his chair. Achiko sucked in gasps of air. What did you do to provoke him? She asked, voice wobbly. Todoroki reached out to fiddle with the paper crane on her table. I've had contact with Izuku, he admitted. I tricked All Might into calling Izuku. Both of them really needed it. 1, 2, 3. It took a full count to 10 for Achiko to process the words. You what? She asked, faint. Todoroki's voice was grim. You heard me. They needed it. Was it worth almost dying? She asked. I don't think he would have, he said. It was worth anything else. Worth your career? A pained silence. You didn't tell me you were involved in politics, she said, to fill the quiet. Is that why you came looking for me when you heard I was doing politics? Yes, Todoroki admitted. I thought we might work together. I want to help Deku be a hero, she said solemnly. I don't think All for One will approve. Todoroki coughed on choked laughter. No. All for One said he wants Deku safe, she murmured. If I can make the right arrangements with the Hero Commission, they might stop hunting Deku in return for his help. But it won't work, Todoroki interrupted. You know how they treat Izuku? That can change, Achiko said, passionate, and saw something flash across Todoroki's face. What is it? His quirk, Todoroki said, slow and heavy. It's a secret I won't share, but the Hero Commission knows and they won't love him for it. Achiko frowned. His quirk? It'll sooner destroy him than them, unless, she breathed out, short and sharp. Do they really think he'll destroy himself to destroy them? He doesn't hate like that. Todoroki hesitated. Regardless, he's a threat. Be careful, Uraraka. She thought of Deku's sure, calm words to Stain, the confidence in Deku's posture, and realized that Deku must have changed just as much as she had over the past few years. It was a frightening thought. I don't want him to destroy himself, she said, twisting her fingers into her shorts. I want him to be happy. Todoroki's face shifted toward compassion. Uraraka, sometimes you can't be happy until you're safe. I don't think he's safe with the Hero Commission, and I bet his father agrees. Tell me about Deku, she demanded. All that you can, all that's not a secret you have to keep. Todoroki closed his eyes, sighed, and told her about Deku's underground network. He's helping people, he concluded. I think that's what he wanted really, out of being a hero. He has free reign, she said, only half registering Todoroki's words. A lot more than I thought. I think if he decided to join the Hero Commission, and if he were guaranteed safety, his father might let him. Uraraka, Todoroki warned. No, she interrupted, ashamed at her rudeness but too caught up in the moment to fully care. I'm tired of everyone being careful about Deku. I'm willing to take risks for him. He deserves it. I'm not going to convince you, he murmured, almost too soft to hear. Then louder, fine. Just make sure it's what he really wants. It is, she promised, and that was that. Kaori huddled under an outcrop of building, safe from the pounding rain. It was a cold night, and a windy one. Limping footsteps approached. Expecting the person to pass her by, she twisted around to gauge the cause of the limp. The person was dressed in tatters of clothing, and there was a stain of blood across the bottom half of their shirt. Between the limp and the stain, Kaori realized they were dealing with a stab wound or something similar. The person's limping footsteps stopped as they saw her. Akagi, they croaked, and the voice was young and fragile. Akagi Kaori? Yes, she confirmed, startled. Come out of the rain. The person swayed. Need help? I can see that, she murmured, holding out a hand. Come and get dry. It was a pathetically small help, but it was about all she could do. The size of the bloodstain indicated something serious, and she didn't have more than passing medical expertise. The person half crumpled on the steps up to her. She hurried over. Save my strength, the teenager, they couldn't have been older than Midoriya when they first met, mumbled. Needs spirit. Spirit's not available until morning, she said, kneeling at the person's side. They were a girl, she noticed, a girl with long, dripping hair. I'm dying, the girl said with such coherence that Kaori was for a moment taken aback. I need, a cough, rattling, shook the girl's frame. Need spirit. Kaori thought of all Midoriya's veiled references to his living situation and swallowed grief. He can't come until morning, she repeated, soft and sorrowing. I don't even know where he lives. He has, cough, healing quirk, a rattling breath. Only thing that will save me now, she whispered. Kaori nodded. There were wild rumors of what Midoriya's quirk was, anything from warping to invisibility to strength enhancement, but Kaori had knelt at Midori's side as he healed a gash in her arm. Now was not the time to question how the girl knew, or guessed, the truth. I don't know how to contact him, she whispered to the girl, drawing the girl into her arms. I'm so sorry. The girl blinked up at her, eyes hazy. Have you a phone? Yes, Kaori said, pulling it out. Midoriya paid for it. Do you have someone you want to call? Did you call? Another hacking cough. Spirit? Yes, but his phone has been confiscated for the next while, Kaori said. Calling him won't help. Track his home, the girl suggested, and hope. The slight hope, but hope. Without a word, Kaori unlocked her phone and flew through screens of content to get to GPS tracking. It took long, too long, and the girl was pale with blood loss by the time Kaori got the right information. I'm going to wrap your wound, all right? She murmured. You need it. You're lucky. Spirit's only 5 blocks away. The girl was near unresponsive. Kaori tore strips off her sweatshirt, pulled the bindings tight with trembling hands, and hauled the girl up into a bridal carry. It was easier than it should have been. The girl was far too light for her age. Kaori started the trek, footsteps staggering from the weight. 1 block. 2 blocks. 3 blocks. At the 4th block, a hero stopped her. Ma'am, he started, and Kaori realized it looked like she was carrying a dead body. Only the girl's faint breaths convinced her otherwise. There was no time for this. Gritting her teeth, Kaori summoned the sound of a full-on battle a block away, the sheet distance spiking a headache behind her eyes. The hero glanced at her, glanced over his shoulder, glanced again, and left at a run for the supposed fight. That gave her about 5 minutes. She could make it. She could. Breath coming in gasps, she hauled onwards, digging from a fast-draining well of energy to go faster, faster, faster. The GPS pin came into sight. The house was utterly nondescript. She shouldn't have expected anything else. Propping the girl against the wall of the house, she knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, louder. Behind her, faintly, the sound of running footsteps. She banged on the door, desperate. If she got arrested here and now, the girl would die and Midoriya's ability to handle the homeless network would be severely impaired. Someone tall opened the door. Not Midoriya. I need to see Midoriya Izuku now, she said, kneeling to heft the deadweight body of the girl. The man paused for an agonizing second before opening the door. Kaori stumbled through, and the door shut with the audible click of locks being turned. How did you find this place? The man asked, quiet and deadly. He was running risk assessment. Well, fair enough, Kaori was doing the same thing. The man wasn't bothering to hide his threat level. Between the height, the sense of firm agelessness, and the posture of one who was used to crushing things underfoot, the man registered as maximum threat. So this was Midoriya's father. But there were more important things at hand. This girl is dying, she said. I need Midoriya to heal her now. How did you find this place? The man repeated, implacable. I've called Midoriya on the phone before, and I used the signal to track his GPS location to here. She breathed, exhausted and urgent. Please, sir. The sir was inadvertent, it slipped out naturally. This girl is about to die. I need Midoriya to heal her now. The man paused, lost in thought. A knock echoed on the door, and Kaori's heart sank. Move out of the way, the man said, cold and composed, and Kaori shuffled into the closest hallway. She could no longer see the man or the door, but she heard crystal clear the sound of a door opening. I am sorry to intrude on your evening, said the voice of the hero who had pursued her, but have you seen a young woman carrying a body? This is of utmost importance. I have not, said the man, and Kaori leaned against the wall in stark relief. In her arms, the girl stirred weakly. Please contact a hero or the police should you see anyone matching that description, the hero said, and the door shut without further discussion. The man came back into sight. I require your name, he said, and there was no refusing the tone. Kaori swallowed, well aware the danger such a man knowing her name could cause. Well aware that it was already too late for that. Akagi Kaori, she said. Sir, please, this girl is dying. Something like comprehension flashed across the man's features. You are my son's lieutenant. Very well. He held out his arms. I will take her now. Kaori clung tight to the girl. Oh. I'll wait for Midoriya. A stubborn thing, aren't you? I should have expected no less. But I insist on handling the girl to see if she is a spy. She's dying, Kaori snapped. In her arms, the girl's breathing was nearly non-existent. That is the first priority. On the contrary, the man murmured. I will gladly sacrifice one life to keep my location secure. He looked at her, sharp and intense, and she heard the unspoken words. You are already one too many. Again, he held out his arms. Everything in Kaori was screaming that this man was not to be trusted, that Midoriya's veiled hints of a villainous father were something more than an understatement. She looked down to the teenager in her arms. The girl was turning blue, breathing hitching. Wordlessly, she passed the girl over. The man took the teenager's weight and walked around the corner. Kaori followed. The man settled the girl on the table, and something about that gave Kaori chills. Maybe it was the way the man was clearly adept at handling unconscious bodies. Maybe it was something darker. The man held his hand, glowing above the girl. Seconds passed. Kaori's heart thundered, bang bang, bang bang. Slowly, delicately, the man's hand drifted to the girl's ankle, peeling away the sock. There was an incision there, something Kaori hadn't noticed before. The man straightened, walked to a cabinet, came back with a knife. Kaori took a step forward, bang 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 bang. I'm not killing her, the man said, short and cold, before making a careful incision in the girl's ankle, pausing, and peeling something small and dark with blood out of the girl's flesh. Zip. They had chipped her. Ah, said the man. Clever. Chip a captive, then let her escape to find spirit. They already know our location. He turned, then, to Kaori, his eyes glittering like cold marbles. And you were the one who brought her here. I didn't know, Kaori said, resisting the thrumming urge to step backward. And she is still dying. So she is, the man murmured, and it's too late for killing either of you to be of any use. Very well. He vanished. Literally vanished. But his quirk had been the glowing hand, and no one had more than one. The villain at Kamino Ward did. That villain had raised an entire ward to the ground at a thought, barely leashed by all might. Midoriya had said he was arrested on charge of being his father's son. Like that was crime enough to merit imprisonment. Midoriya? Midoriya, who refused to breathe a single word about his quirk. Midoriya, of whom rumors couldn't decide which quirk he had. The poor boy. The poor boy. There was the sound of running feet down a staircase. Midoriya skidded into view, sock-footed. He took one look at her face and flinched. Later, he said, eyes already on the girl half dead atop the table. He walked over, took her pulse at the wrist, and nodded. Kaori, he said, you need to leave. The heroes will be here soon. Not until the girl is better. They'll catch you. Father won't spend time protecting you. Midoriya, that girl is dying. Don't waste time arguing with me. Midoriya shuddered, closing his eyes. Leave as soon as I finish, he said, the words not from friend to friend, but from leader to subordinate, expecting exact obedience. He must have learned the tone from his father, Kaori noted distantly, because he certainly hadn't known it when she first met him. Midoriya settled hands on the girl's stomach, and light, golden light, tracing a wide wound. The moment hovered, eternal. All for one entered the room, carrying an armful of paperwork. "You have 2 minutes before we leave, my Izuku." He spared a hand to ruffle through Midoriya's hair. Midoriya hissed, "I won't make it. Help me." "And why should I help a spy?" "Because she's an innocent, and because I'm not leaving until she's helped." "It would be faster to help you," All for One conceded, laying a hand Midoriya's. The lights dimmed. The girl screamed. "Time to go," All for One said, coiling an arm around Midoriya. Midoriya didn't protest, instead locking eyes with Kaori. "The back door is down the hallway to the left," he said. "From there, get on the roof and run." Kaori nodded, kneeling by the table to heft the girl over her shoulder. Again she was reminded that the girl was light, too light. Midoriya and All for One disappeared in a blast of hot air. Kaori ran. Through the hall. Out the door. Send a quick prayer of relief to whatever force left a ladder propped against a nearby roof. Climb the ladder, girl over one shoulder. Hear shouts, see flashlights. "Stop, in the name of the law," shouted the voice of the hero All for One had turned away. "Run, gait uneven from the weight of the girl. Leap a rooftop, feet skidding. Slide halfway down a roof and lay there, heart hammering. Nothing." The girl stirred. Opened her eyes. "You're safe now," Kaori whispered, and disappeared into the night. Shoyuta had his alerts set to notify him of anything regarding Spirit, who operated like Midoriya Izuku would have if the boy had grown up, learned some self-preservation, and trained under Nedzu for years. In other words, self-preservation aside, Shoyuta was almost certain Spirit was Midoriya. He kept this thought to himself. The call came at 1:07 a.m. He answered on the second ring. Eraserhead speaking. "Spirit has been traced to the following location." The hero operator rattled off an address. "Please present yourself there as soon as possible." He stood, stock still, for a few precious seconds as the operator hung up. He might see Midoriya again. He might see Midoriya in chains again. He might see a massacre worse than Tartarus. Grimly, he set off for the address at a run. Sirens whirred as he got close. Civilians milled about, curious, while police officers attempted to hustle away the crowd. No massacre. Not yet. Shoyuta jabbed his way through to the front, holding his hero license between his teeth. The police officer glanced at him, nodded, and waved him through. Magma, a senior undergrounder, waved him over. "They got away," he said without preamble. "Packed up a few minutes before we arrived, from the looks of it. That was one chained child, one massacre, avoided, that." Shoyuta was too professional to exhale in relief. "Please look around and give us your first impressions of the house," Magma continued. "Other heroes have already cleared the house of traps, but be careful." Shoyuta nodded and jogged into the house. The Midoriya household was relatively small, all things considered. It was built more like a bunker than a house, all thick, white walls, with carpet scraped over concrete flooring. This was no place for a child to grow up. He lingered over the kitchen table. Fresh blood ground into the woodwork showed that people had been here less than an hour ago. Whose blood? He wondered, sidestepping into the hallway. He prodded farther into the guts of the house, pushing past forensic experts and heroes at every turn. A bathroom. A bedroom. A kitchen, shelves stocked with enough food to last for years. A dining room, table massive in the middle of the room. Another bedroom. He paused at the second bedroom. It was less utilitarian than the rest of the house, from the colorful blankets on the bed to the wide array of books on the shelves. Quirk theory, read one spine. There were others. The Adventures of Aiko. Sherlock Holmes. Pre-Quirk history. Shoyuta entered the room slowly, looking for some clue to Midoriya's well-being. The desk caught his attention, a neatly organized waterfall of scribbled notes. He bent down, scanning the papers. Homeless shelters. Soup kitchens. Hero patrol routes, startlingly accurate. Martial arts. That was Midoriya's handwriting, all right. Alone in the room, he allowed himself a stab of pain-guilt resignation. There wasn't any avoiding it, now. These notes would be cross-referenced with Midoriya's UA schoolwork, and the whole underground hero network would be buzzing with the news soon enough. The manhunt for Spirit had already dragged in most underground heroes already. He let his fingers touch a scrap of paper detailing food distribution routes. It implied that Midoriya was out there, delivering supplies in person. It meant that All for One was letting his son roam free, at least in part. It meant that Midoriya would be that much easier to find and recapture. He moved on. The bed was rumpled, as if Midoriya had rolled out of sleep when the spy came through the door. Shoyuta still needed to figure out how the Hero Commission had placed a spy into All for One's house, but that was a secondary urgency to learning if Midoriya was safe. He rescanned the room. Black clothes, dusty with use, lay draped over the desk chair and tucked neatly into the closet. The clothes were a modified, more inconspicuous version of Shigaraki's all-black clothes. Shoyuta closed his eyes to ward off the impending headache. Someone at the door. Turned. Magma. What do you see? Magma asked, walking into the room. Shoyuta considered his words carefully. He didn't want to implicate Midoriya, but the handwriting analyses would come back soon enough, and it would raise questions why he didn't recognize his own student's handwriting. Gingerly, he picked up a scribbled piece of paper. This is Midoriya Izuku's handwriting, he said, slow as a death toll. Magma nodded, face sympathetic. We suspected as much. That is part of why you were asked to come on site. I'm sorry, Aizawa. Shoyuta nodded, feeling his hair stir at the motion. I thought this might happen. The Hero Commission has contingency plans for Spirit being Midoriya, Magma continued, near gently. You're to be a top investigator, given your knowledge of the boy. Some superiors worried about your sentimentality, but you have consistently proven yourself to be a professional. I'll forward you details tomorrow morning. Shoyuta nodded, face carefully blank. The rest of the visit passed in a blur. You're to be a top investigator, haunting Shoyuta at every step. He couldn't hunt down Midoriya like he deserved any of this. Yet, to refuse the Hero Commission so boldly would be the end of his career, and then where would his students be? He walked home, hunched agonist drizzling rain. Walked up the steps to his house. Opened the door. He scanned the room, more out of instinct than reason. Someone else was breathing in the room. Rushing forward, he flipped the person over his shoulder before he properly registered the presence. With a boot on the person's chest, his knife at their throat, he flicked out his scarf to snag the light switch. Midoriya looked up at him, eyes trusting. Hi, sensei. I'm assigned to lead your case. Shoyuta snapped through the thundering heartbeat of he's safe, he's safe, he's safe. Think before you step. The unspoken words. This was all the warning he could give Midoriya. I know, Midoriya said, infuriatingly calm. I came to say, don't risk your career over me. Curse this self-sacrificial child. You know what that means for you, Shoyuta said, offering Midoriya a hand up. Midoriya took it. I know, he agreed. Also, I have news about Trigger. Shoyuta blinked. Explain. Someone has a large supply of Trigger and is trying to fuel a mob with it, Midoriya said, straight to the point, and then, almost but not quite an afterthought. It's beyond the scope of what I typically deal with. Shoyuta took a step closer. And what is your typical scope? Midoriya smiled back, refusing to be intimidated. I'm not a vigilante, if that's what you're asking. I intervene before things hit that level. Midoriya was a manipulator, then, training under the hand of his father. Midoriya, Shoyuta said slowly, the only known source of Trigger is your father. That's exactly the problem, Midoriya said without missing a beat. Father has no knowledge of the Trigger supplier, and only a vague idea about their plans. We think. Midoriya's phone buzzed, such a little sound for how it sent shivers crawling up Shuta's back. The young man flashed a look at his lock screen, slipping the phone back into his pocket with an apologetic look. I have to go, he said, all calm certainty. We think the Trigger deal is located in or around Tokyo. They're definitely not associated with the League of Villains. Good luck. The League of Villains, Shoyuta said. What is your relationship to them? Midoriya shrugged, black ooze already encompassing his legs. We tolerate each other. Shigaraki? Midoriya made a face. He's a mess. If you see him, tell him I said hi. And then he was gone. Shoyuta let out a long breath, only then letting the crash of the day hit him. Midoriya, for all he was pressed into the underworld, was still so full of light. Shoyuta would hang on to that knowledge. Someday, when crippling self-blame would stop him from being overwhelmed with the knowledge that he let them take the kid to Tartarus, he might even be comforted by the knowledge. Midoriya had given him important knowledge. His old class was too wrapped up in searching for justice for Midoriya, but Shoyuta knew that, no matter how much it burned, one had to look at the bigger picture. Midoriya's arrest and kidnapping were known facts. Midoriya's relationship with the League? Unknown. He would have to think about this. Dragging a weary hand over his eyes, he committed Midoriya's brief visitation to memory and stumbled upstairs to bed.